Everything changed the day. The sky cracked open, and hellish monsters started pouring into our world from mysterious portals. Right then, a few chosen souls transcended humanity, awakening legendary powers that turned them into guardians. They became our only hope, risking everything on the front lines to hold back the nightmare. Down in the capital, panic was setting in. A great rift, one so dangerous it was deemed impossible even for the elite, refused to close. Then someone spotted a figure. A lone man stepped out from the swirling void of the abyss. The crowd went wild as the portal finally flickered out. The lone warrior stood tall, confirming the dungeon had been purged. This was none other than the living legend himself, Sir Arthur Sterling. He'd closed more rifts than anyone can count, even after crossing 60 years of age. But then, silence. The legendary guardian vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but stories of his impossible strength. 10 years after he disappeared, an old man in a quiet infirmary was still insisting that he was that very same legend. But looking at his weathered face, the young caretaker didn't believe a word of it, which honestly just left the old knight annoyed. The guy actually started mocking him to a colleague, joking that this old-timer really thought he was the great Sir Arthur. He called it pure nonsense. I mean, why on earth would a legendary hero be stuck wasting away in a state-run nursing home? His friend pointed out they had the same name and age, but they just laughed it off, assuming the old guy was probably just a failed comedian in his younger days. They joked about how they'd never take a boring job like this if they were actually guardians, already planning where to grab a drink later. But right then, one of them noticed a man slumped over, looking completely drained of life. He rushed over to help, but stopped dead. A massive, chitinous ant suddenly materialized right there in the middle of the room. Before he could even scream, the monster lunged, grabbing the man's throat and taking his head clean off with one brutal snap. The nurse was paralyzed, forced to watch the gore unfold in absolute horror. The beast turned to its next victim, but then, boom, a figure blurred through the air, driving a blade straight into the creature's skull. The nurse was stunned. His jaw hit the floor when he saw his savior, Sir Arthur Sterling. The old knight didn't waste time, barking at the man to get out while he still could. Arthur told the nurse to evacuate everyone immediately. There was a whole swarm of these things coming, and he was going to face them all alone. The nurse was terrified for his safety, but Arthur just gave a grim smirk. He wasn't planning on dying yet. He knew exactly what his body could handle. Right then, the nurse knew. This was no joke. This was the real Sir Arthur. But why? Why was a legend like him in a place like this? As the sun began to dip below the horizon, more of those giant insects crawled out from the shadows. Sir Arthur watched them in cold silence. He wondered how the guild council could have missed a rift this big. Then, screech. One of the monsters spotted him and let out a piercing alarm to call the rest of the pack. Well, cover blown. Time to move. Sir Arthur launched himself at the swarm from above, his blade finding the brain of the first ant before it could even react. He felt another one lunging from behind, jaws snapping for his neck, but the old knight danced away from death with inches to spare. Honestly, he was just getting annoyed now. With a single, savage arc of his kitchen knife, 4 ants fell dead in the dirt. Just like that, Sir Arthur stood alone in a field of monster carcasses. But man, he was gassing out. He realized just how much age had taken from him, wishing, just for a second, that he had his youth back. Then the ground trembled. A massive, towering scythe mantis rose up right behind him like a nightmare. Arthur looked the beast in the eye, asking if it was the boss of this nest. No answer, just a brutal strike that sent him crashing into a boulder. This was a real problem. The mantis moved in for the kill, jaws dripping as it prepared to feast on his flesh. But at the last second, Arthur's eyes snapped open. "Your breath is disgusting," he growled. In one fluid motion, he buried his blade deep into the monster's skull. The beast shrieked in agony, thrashing wildly and slamming Arthur against the trees to shake him off. When it finally slowed down, Arthur knew it was now or never. He gathered every last ounce of strength left in his old bones for the final blow. Crack, the giant mantis finally collapsed, dead as a doornail. He coughed up blood, a small smile on his face. His skills hadn't completely rusted yet. Then his legs gave out and he hit the ground hard. His body was done, completely spent. 10 years ago, this would have been a warm-up, but dying in the heat of battle, for a hunter, there was something poetic about that. But then ding, a golden light flashed. A notification caught him off guard, congratulating him on conquering the rift. He stared in shock. The system announced it would grant his deepest wish as a reward for clearing the dungeon. Arthur was bathed in a divine blessing of eternal life, and right there, in the middle of the carnage, his body began to transform. As the rift sealed shut, a crowd of people rushed toward him. Later on, the legend woke up to the sound of a lady calling his name. Arthur Sterling blinked, his voice a raspy whisper as he asked, "Where on earth am I?" The young woman, a healer's apprentice, explained that he'd been rushed to the High Citadel's infirmary after being found half dead at the edge of a closing rift. When asked for his records, the old man gave his name and year of birth. The date? It absolutely floored the poor girl. Arthur got defensive. Sure, he looked like a teenager, but he snapped that he was actually 83 years old. The sister just stood there, jaw dropped, unable to believe this boy was an octogenarian. Arthur just sighed, confirming it again with total annoyance. He figured her shock was because he naturally looked 70, well, maybe a youthful 70. But then, he finally caught a glimpse of himself. Arthur stared at his own hands, then scrambled toward a polished mirror. His reflection, completely unrecognizable, shocked doesn't even cover it. Seeing him acting like a madman, the sister figured the rift had scrambled his brains. She rushed off to find a high priest while he stood there, frozen. That's when the memories flooded back. Everything that happened right before he blacked out. It was all coming back in a rush. This wasn't some fevered dream. He'd heard of knights gaining new boons after sealing a dark rift, but this was something else entirely. He'd never heard of a divine grace like this. It didn't just give him power, it literally restored his lost youth. Arthur didn't have time to lounge in an infirmary. He needed answers, so he decided to vanish before the guards could stop him. By the time the sister returned, the bed was empty. Arthur was already standing before the massive, towering spires of the royal vanguard. 10 years. It had been an entire decade since he last stepped foot inside the Guildhall. Inside, the legendary knight noticed the place had changed completely. He approached the desk. He had some very old scores to settle with the association. The clerk just gestured toward a strange, magical kiosk. "Take a ticket and wait your turn, kid," they said, barely looking up. But an 83-year-old man versus modern machinery, not a good mix. A very angry line started forming right behind him. Suddenly, a heavy hand slammed down on his shoulder. A massive brute loomed over him, demanding Arthur hand over his spot. People whispered it was the copper-tier thug from the House of Metis. But then, something crazy happened. Our young hero started lecturing the giant. Arthur told the brute to learn some manners and wait in line like everyone else. Enraged, the thug grabbed Arthur by his tunic, ready to snap him. Suddenly, a tall, imposing presence cut through the tension. "Enough," he commanded. "Combat is strictly forbidden within the vanguard walls." The crowd gasped. It was him, Sir Percival Blackwood, a legendary Grand Sovereign Knight. Most had never even seen a gold tier in the flesh. Percival looked annoyed. He was a hero of the realm, yet the guild was using someone of his rank to play lobby security. The onlookers started whispering about his massive frame and how he looked like the absolute pinnacle of masculinity. Percival pretended to be annoyed by the flattery, but honestly, he absolutely loved being called the manliest knight in the kingdom. Arthur squinted, that face, he knew it. "Wait," he said aloud, "Percy, is that you?" Total silence hit the room. Hearing that old nickname, it hit the Grand Knight like a physical blow. He looked genuinely terrified. The other knights started gossiping instantly. "Percy, who calls a Grand Sovereign Knight Percy?" Arthur kept going, talking about how long it had been and how old his friend looked now. Percival was literally shaking with rage as the whispers grew louder. See, here's the thing. 10 years ago, when he finally reached the top rank, Percival decided Percy was way too soft. He adopted a legendary name to fit his status. Now, this random kid was ruining his entire reputation. Arthur was about to ask his old acquaintance for a quick favor, but Percival lunged, grabbing him by the collar. "Who are you?" he roared. "Identify yourself right now." Arthur didn't blink. He just noted how Percival had lost all his knightly grace, reminding him that a public brawl would be, well, a disaster. Gritting his teeth, Percival apologized to the crowd. But he leaned in, suggesting they move this conversation somewhere more private. "Don't even think about running," he hissed, his eyes filled with a terrifying fury that actually gave Arthur the chills. They entered a massive, empty training hall. Arthur looked around, impressed. "So, what is this place?" Percival explained it was a private sparring ground. Then he demanded the truth. "Who are you, and how do you know my real name?" Arthur stood tall. He introduced himself as the legendary knight of old, explaining that a recent incident had, well, reversed the clock on him. Percival wasn't buying it, not for a second. He figured this kid was just some arrogant brat mocking a high-ranking official. "I gave you a chance," Percival growled. He started channeling massive amounts of essence into his fist, the air beginning to crackle. He swung, intending to beat the truth out of the boy, but Arthur dodged it effortlessly. "Still as hot-headed as ever, aren't you?" he teased. Percival froze. That speed. That wasn't possible for a normal teenager. He was utterly stunned. Arthur just looked at him, shaking his head. "Listen, son, when you get to my age, you really should learn to control that temper." Sir Alistair Thorne stared his opponent down, admitting that just looking at the man made him desperate to uncover his true name as he decided to get serious. Then, the high-ranking paladin let go of his humanity, triggering a beast blood skill that warped his body into a massive, terrifying werewolf. The beast roared that he was done holding back. He lunged with primal fury, daring our hero to try and dodge his claws one more time. Arthur Sterling had no choice but to brace and block the impact. The raw strength was impressive, but then the werewolf growled a warning. This next move was going to hurt. Alistair lashed out, his claws tearing through the air like serrated daggers. The strike shredded through Arthur's defenses, sending him soaring across the clearing before he slammed hard into a solid stone wall. The beast knight stopped, worried he'd gone too far. But to his shock, Arthur just stood up with a smile and said peace was officially off the table. He dug his heel deep into the dirt, firmly grounding himself for what was coming next. Like a bolt of lightning, the legendary knight charged. Alistair couldn't believe his eyes. His elite power didn't even seem to leave a scratch on the young man. Arthur muttered that his punch might sting a little. Then, bam, a heavy fist caught the wolf's jaw, sending him spinning into the air before he crashed back down. A long silence followed. The massive werewolf didn't move a single muscle. Our hero actually started to get a bit anxious, wondering if he'd accidentally killed the guy with that last hit. Flashback to 20 years ago, a young Alistair used to think knights were just brutes, until he saw Arthur sitting calmly atop a mountain of slain dragons. That one meeting changed everything for the young squire, making him realize the true, majestic scale of his master's power. He didn't just see strength, he saw something of absolute, splendid beauty. Back in the present, the unconscious knight finally started to wake up. Alistair opened his eyes and briefly saw the legend's ancient, true face. It startled him, but then he saw the young Arthur just looking relieved that he was still breathing. Arthur didn't waste a second before scolding him. "Attacking me like that? I taught you better than that, boy." That was the final proof. Alistair finally realized the young man standing there was truly the legendary hero, who now just looked completely irritated. A short while later, our hero finished explaining exactly how he ended up in this youthful state to the knight, who seemed fascinated by the nature of this divine boon. Alistair explained that boons are permanent gifts, unlike temporary spells. Even then, he admitted that his own knowledge on the subject was pretty limited. The tall knight bowed his head, feeling terrible that he couldn't be of more help to his old master. Arthur finally had to tell Alastair to put a shirt on, since the guy was just standing there admiring his own muscles after his clothes exploded during the transformation. The old hero told the younger man not to overthink his current situation. This rift-torn world had become a strange place, and the only thing that really mattered was that he'd regained his youth. The overjoyed paladin begged Arthur to return to the royal order, insisting that the entire kingdom would celebrate his homecoming. But as Arthur spoke his name, the entire atmosphere suddenly turned cold and heavy. Alastair was stunned to hear that Arthur wanted to keep his return a total secret. Then, Arthur asked if he knew the real reason he'd retired in the first place. The master's expression turned tragic as he asked if Alastair remembered the names Thomas and Julian. The tall knight nodded slowly. "I will remember them until the day I die, sir." Arthur recalled how they threw their lives away just so he could survive those hellish dungeons. Alastair insisted he would have done the exact same thing, seeing how much the old man meant to them. But he was floored when Arthur revealed that their sacrifice was the very reason he quit. He explained that he'd become too much of an idol. He couldn't bear the guilt of watching young souls bleed out just to save his tired old bones. Arthur feared reliving that soul-crushing agony if he went public. He simply couldn't watch another young sprout wither and die for his sake. After hearing that, the paladin finally understood. He gave his word to keep his master's return a secret, just as he requested. When asked about his next move, the old man admitted he was still weighing his options. So, Alastair decided this was the perfect time to ask for a small favor. Later, deep in a green forest, Arthur noted how his green cloak marked him as a lowly squire. It was a clever system for hiding his true rank. He thought back to Alastair's request: join a low-level squire raid and keep an eye on things from the inside. The paladin had revealed that an ongoing investigation was making him lose sleep, stating that having Arthur there would be a massive relief, even if he couldn't share the classified details just yet. Arthur agreed to help, knowing the tall knight wanted his legendary power as a safety net in case things went sideways. But just as he started wondering what could possibly require his strength, a rude person slammed right into his shoulder. The thug's lackey absolutely lost it when our young-looking hero suggested a simple apology was in order, flexing his buddy's status and claiming he was nearly a C-grade knight, so a D-grade rookie like Arthur better start shaking. Turns out, this loudmouth was none other than the disgraced D-grade hunter, Lord Silas of the Viper Guild, the self-proclaimed king of the back alleys, who sneered that our green heroes should run while they still had legs. The three of them just strutted off, laughing their heads off at the annoying old man. Dealing with these arrogant fools made Sir Arthur realize one thing: some people will always judge a book by its cover. Just then, a calm-looking man stepped in, telling Arthur not to give those lowlifes a second thought since they're famous for picking on the new recruits. Our veteran protagonist was genuinely caught off guard when the man, Lord Alastair, asked for his name, honestly assuming Arthur was just some student out on a field trip. The second he heard the young man's name, Alastair's eyes lit up, noting he must be named after the legendary knight of old. He then asked Arthur for his age, and without thinking, the hero admitted he was 80 years old. Realizing his massive slip-up, Arthur quickly corrected himself, claiming he was actually approaching 18. This got Alastair even more excited, since the kid was the same age as his own son, muttering about how profitable these dungeon raids must be for the youth nowadays. As Alastair rambled on about his son who does nothing but play games all day, Arthur couldn't help but find it ironic. If he'd had a kid back in his day, they'd probably be Alastair's age. Right on cue, the pair was approached by a total firecracker of a girl and her much quieter friend. The one with the bright orange hair introduced herself as 24-year-old Lady Beatrice, while her shy shadow was Lady Alina. She walked right up to our hero, sparking his curiosity for a split second before planting a kiss right on his cheek, telling our stunned, blushing veteran that's just her signature way of saying hello. The middle-aged man just chuckled, calling out to Arthur that, "Man, it must be great to be young." Which Arthur found hilarious, considering he was actually old enough to be that girl's grandfather. Suddenly, another voice calling his name cut through the chatter. It was a man in a sharp suit, wearing a confident smile and carrying a lethal-looking katana. When asked, he introduced himself as the man in charge of this entire expedition, the C-grade commander, Sir Cedric. And just like that, the introductions were finished. Cedric turned to Arthur, asking if he was close to the S-grade Duke Valerius, since the Duke doesn't usually go around recommending random hunters. Arthur played it cool, claiming he was just a distant relative of the great Duke. With the pleasantries out of the way, the C-grade commander ordered everyone to fall in line for a quick briefing before they breached the dungeon. Cedric stood tall before the group, announcing himself as their leader and acknowledging that while most were D-grade rookies, he saw massive potential in every single one of them. He even teased that some might soon rise to his own rank, but then his tone shifted, explaining that while these dungeons weren't usually lethal, D-grade breaches are notoriously unpredictable. He made it clear, obey his every word if they wanted to come back with their pockets full and their heads attached. One of the Viper thugs scoffed, calling it a total exaggeration for a measly D-grade hole in the ground, which earned him a sharp scolding from Arthur about how preparation is the only thing that keeps you alive, nearly starting a fight until someone stepped between them. Silas, the Viper leader, told his boys to go easy on the rookie, since he clearly had zero experience, stating that only seasoned veterans could truly sense real danger. To the legendary hero hiding in a young man's body, those thugs looked like nothing more than absolute clowns. Finally, the briefing wrapped up. It was time. The party moved toward the shimmering threshold. The sun was blazing overhead as they stood before the magical gate, the entrance to this D-grade desert tomb. Stepping through, they were immediately swallowed by a sea of sand. While Lady Beatrice joked about forgetting her sunscreen, Silas was already complaining, wanting to wrap this up fast so he could get back to the tavern for a cold drink. Arthur just sighed, peeling off his jacket as the heat of the annoying desert began to bite. The commander called out, announcing they move out once the entire squad had successfully crossed over. Watching the Viper gang joke around and treat the raid like a vacation made Arthur's blood boil. It reminded him of a time long ago, when a young Duke Valerius was pushed to his absolute limit. Back then, the young Duke had complained that the raid was way harder than expected, all because he thought a small gate meant an easy win. So, the old veteran had drilled it into him. Never, ever let your guard down, no matter how small the entrance looks. Standing over the defeated boss of that old dungeon, Arthur told the boy he must always obey his orders, a promise the young Duke swore to keep forever. Back in the present, our hero remembered how everyone used to be terrified of dungeons, purely because they couldn't judge the danger by the size of the gate. But now, since everyone thinks they can measure the difficulty perfectly, these new hunters have become dangerously lazy. Seeing how much the world had changed, Arthur decided to ask the C-grade commander something that had been nagging at his mind. Alistair asked how tough these ruins really were, making the party leader figure this was his very first expedition. The leader explained that Iron Rank ruins were easy pickings for mercenaries like them, and besides, there were Bronze Rank vets on standby just in case things got messy. Our hero just nodded, noting that they certainly seemed to have every little detail planned out. But then, the leader was caught off guard when Alistair asked one simple question. What happens if you've completely underestimated this place? Silence. That's when Baron Sterling chimed in, mocking our hero and telling him that nobody would blame a coward for running away if he was that terrified. One of his thugs joined in, laughing and telling the boss not to go too hard on the poor newcomer. The veteran hunter tried to keep the peace, reassuring Alistair that they were perfectly safe because the guild's detection crystals had already confirmed the danger level. Our hero still wasn't buying it, so the man added that the guild's sensors had been the gold standard for 5 years and had never, not once, messed up a reading. Alastair asked if he was absolutely sure about that, which the man confirmed, while the arrogant Baron started grumbling about how annoying these rookies were. At that, the oldest member of the group began to scold the younger hotheads for their attitude. Boiling with rage, Baron grabbed our hero by the collar and dared him to say one more word. Alastair didn't blink. He just gave him a piece of advice. Stay quiet while you're out on a hunt. Baron just let out a massive laugh, assuming Alastair was just a terrified kid acting tough on his first real mission. Alastair asked if he even understood why he gave that warning, but before Baron could answer, a massive purple serpent lunged out of the shadows. The beast's sudden arrival sent a wave of panic through the group, leaving even the loud-mouthed Baron frozen in fear. The monster hissed, coiled its body, and prepared to tear him apart. But then, blink and you missed it. With one lightning-fast strike, Alastair decapitated the beast, ending the fight before it even started. Baron stood there, jaw on the floor, unable to process how fast that just happened. Alastair looked back and told him he really should start taking his advice. Because in the wild, loud-mouthed hunters are always the first ones the monsters hunt down. As our hero walked away, Baron's face turned bright red. He couldn't stand being corrected by some young brat. One of the worried mercenaries turned to the leader, asking if that snake was truly an iron-rank beast, because she'd never seen anything that powerful before. The leader found it strange, too. Usually, iron-rank threats are just oversized rats or insects. If that purple worm was actually a bronze-rank monster, they were in serious trouble, and the leader started to feel a pit in his stomach. Meanwhile, deeper in the desert ruins, a young squire asked Leo what their next move should be. Leo told his friends to stay calm, but when the girls suggested calling the adults for help, Leo shot it down. The ruins were too deadly, and those mercenaries couldn't be trusted. But as they argued, a shadow was watching from the purple mist. Suddenly, a bone-chilling scream echoed through the sands as a giant serpent locked its eyes on the two young hunters. They were paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare of pure horror. A scream ripped through the air as the hungry monster closed in. Meanwhile, Alastair continued his trek through the scorching heat. The party leader was sweating bullets, his mind racing as he thought back to how the girl described that snake as something way beyond their rank. He tried to play it cool, but he couldn't. Every instinct he had was screaming that the serpent they just saw was at least a Tier 3 monster. He glanced at Alastair, trying to convince himself the ruins weren't that dangerous. After all, a rookie had just killed a snake in one hit. Could the guild have gotten the label wrong? No way. He brushed the thought aside, telling himself the guild's tools were never wrong. Behind him, Baron Sterling was grunting and huffing, drenched in sweat. He finally snapped, shouting at the leader that they'd been walking for 30 minutes and demanding a break right now. Seeing the rest of the team looking exhausted, the leader gave in and called for a rest. The old veteran just shook his head in disappointment, watching the youngsters collapse after a simple half-hour stroll. That's when Baron noticed something shifting in the dunes, and then he saw it. A massive purple serpent was looming right over their heads. This one looked way meaner than the first. The terrified leader yelled for everyone to draw their weapons, convinced this was the boss. The monster hissed and began to slither toward the group. Baron looked at Alastair and then drew his axe, remembering the shame of being saved earlier. To everyone's shock, Baron charged straight at the beast, screaming that he'd take this one down all by himself. The leader screamed a warning, but Baron wasn't listening. He wanted the glory. Just watch me kill this thing. Without a second thought, Sir Alastair lunged at the beast, ready to end its life. But his blade hit like a toothpick. He was absolutely stunned at how pathetic his strike was against the serpent's scales. Watching from the sidelines, old Silas found the whole display embarrassing. These squires really had no idea how to read a fight, did they? Sensing an opening, the massive snake coiled back, ready to strike. Alastair froze. He looked death right in the eyes and realized this was it. He was done for. But then, boom. Just as the monster lunged, Captain Julian leaped in, parrying the blow and pulling the hot-headed knight to safety. Julian took a quick breath, relieved to see his man didn't have any extra holes in him. He ordered the others to fall back. "Stand down," he barked. As the only night tier in the room, this monster was his problem now. With a burst of speed, Julian charged. He launched himself into the air, his saber gleaming as he brought it down with everything he had. Total shock. His blade did nothing, just like Alistair's axe. Then, out of nowhere, someone screamed at him to aim for the serpent's head. Julian didn't have time to wonder who yelled, but he locked onto the target immediately. He used the monster's own massive body as a springboard, catapulting himself higher. He was determined to end this right now. One clean arc, one perfect strike. Julian finally decapitated the beast with a single, devastating slash. The giant snake hit the ground dead. Everyone finally exhaled, the tension breaking instantly. Silas strolled over to check on the victor. Julian gave a short nod. He was fine unscathed. But the captain was honest. He gave all the credit to the old-timer. Without that shout, he might not have survived that encounter, let alone won it. Lady Beatrice stepped forward, asking if the raid was finally over. Julian hoped so. He really did. But look at her eyes, pure worry. She pointed out the obvious. The dungeon atmosphere wasn't changing. No magic exit, nothing. That's when the dread set in. They should have seen a rift-cleared notification. Instead, 2 more purple nightmares slithered out from the shadows. Everything they knew was wrong. Logic, out the window. This was supposed to be a Squire tier dungeon, but the monster a knight barely killed wasn't even the boss. Silas just shook his head. The answer was staring them in the face. This wasn't a Squire's Rift, not even close. They were way out of their league. Julian was spiraling. How could the Crown's Guild miscalculate the lethality of a dungeon this badly? He tried to rally his men, but his mind was racing. Nothing about this situation made sense. Suddenly, a scout yelled out, "More monsters on their 6." That was the final straw. Julian finally admitted it. They were in a death trap. "Retreat, everyone out now," he commanded. He wasn't going to let his men die for a mistake. Silas watched the captain with a small smile. Not bad. The kid actually had a sense of responsibility. They kept moving, deep into the tunnels. Alistair was gasping for air, his ego clearly bruised. He started screaming at Julian, calling him a coward for running from a Squire tier rift. Julian snapped back. "Open your eyes. This place is 10 times more dangerous than the guild said." But Alistair wouldn't listen. The paperwork said Squire tier, and look at the old man, he killed one of those things easily. Silas had heard enough. He told the loudmouth to shut his trap before he attracted more unwanted company. Alistair huffed, claiming he wasn't scared and just got caught off guard earlier. Then, a chilling sound echoed from a nearby cave. He jumped nearly out of his skin. Everyone drew their weapons, eyes glued to the darkness. Something was coming. But it wasn't a monster. It was a girl, bloodied and terrified, begging for help. Lady Beatrice rushed to her side. The girl was hysterical, sobbing about her friend who was still trapped back there. She explained through tears how a massive serpent ambushed them. Her friend had jumped in front of the beast to save her. Julian's face hardened. Why on earth were children inside a dangerous rift? He demanded to know what they were doing here. They weren't registered hunters. They shouldn't have been within a mile of the entrance. The girl confessed. Someone offered them a job. Good coin just to sneak in and stay hidden. Alistair's eyes widened. He recognized them, relic thieves, infamous little rats who scavenged dungeons illegally. Beatrice was stunned. Silas found the term interesting. Julian explained. They're scavengers who break into rifts to steal rewards before the guild can claim them. Silas couldn't believe it. Kids, risking their lives for scraps in a place like this. It was madness. Alistair started pointing fingers, accusing the kids of disturbing the dungeon's flow. He argued it was their fault the monsters were so aggressive, and the rank had spiked so suddenly. Julian tried to stay level-headed, saying those were 2 different issues, but Alistair wouldn't drop it. He was convinced these kids caused the anomaly. When the lives of the young scavengers were brought up, a bronze-tier knight insisted they had to rescue them. no matter the cost. This absolutely enraged Baron Vane, the mercenary leader, who snarled that risking their own necks for a couple of street rats was pure suicide. But before the argument could spiral, Sir Alistair stepped in, calmly proposing to go and find the missing children himself. The noble in the velvet doublet insisted the risk was far too high. Still, knowing they couldn't just abandon them, Alistair proposed a solo mission to shut the coward up. Vane just sneered, telling the young warrior he wouldn't stop a dead man from walking straight into his own grave. With a sharp nod, Alistair instructed Captain Thorne to evacuate the main party from the labyrinth while he handled the rescue alone. Thorne had seen Alistair's swordplay, the way he'd already pinpointed the serpent's weak spots, and it was like nothing he'd ever witnessed. The captain chose to put his faith in the mysterious warrior and follow his lead, while Alistair prepared to carry the wounded boy. The girl, Ilara, looked up at him with wide, trembling eyes and asked a single question. Was he really going to save them? With a steady, reassuring smile, he promised to bring them both back. And just like that, the captain ordered his men to move out. As they retreated, Vane's thugs started jeering, mocking our hero for playing the martyr in such a hopeless, God-forsaken pit. But Ilara wasn't laughing. She was terrified for him, even if the whole plan felt like a desperate, idiotic gamble with death. Captain Thorne hated the decision, but with their options vanishing fast, he had no choice but to lead his men toward the exit. Meanwhile, deep in the shadows, young Leo lay bleeding, cursing the greedy lords who'd lied to him, and cursing his own foolishness for trusting them. He remembered the merchant's silver tongue, promising that the job was an easy gold mine with absolutely zero risk. All they had to do was hide in a low-level crypt, wait for the heavy hitters to clear it, and then snatch the leftover rewards. Leo had been hesitant at first. The air in the ruins felt wrong, but the prospect of a better life was too tempting to ignore. The man swore that as mere students, the law wouldn't touch them, and after hearing it was a golden opportunity, Leo finally caved. Back in the present, Leo was frantic about his friend Ilara when he suddenly heard something heavy sliding through the dirt toward him. Terrified, the boy grabbed a jagged branch, bracing for the worst as the shadows loomed closer and closer. But it wasn't a monster, it was Ilara, and right behind her, a mysterious stranger stepped into the dim light of the cave. The girl introduced our hero as the knight who'd come to save them, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and exhaustion. Leo couldn't believe it. The guy looked way too young to be a legendary hero, earning him a sharp, disciplinary smack on the head. Alistair growled at the brat, telling him kids belong in a classroom, not scavenging for scraps in a death trap like this shadow crypt. Ilara broke down, admitting she'd fled her home and took the job because she was desperate for a roof and a warm meal. Hearing that, Alistair's blood boiled. He couldn't stand the thought of adults using children as disposable bait for a few miserable coins. He told the scavengers to get moving and catch up with the group, but right then, a massive, violet serpent slithered into the cavern. The kids froze in pure terror. Leo realized with a sinking heart that they weren't fast enough to outrun a beast like that. Since his leg was crushed, he begged the others to leave him behind and run, but Ilara refused to move an inch. Alistair just stepped forward. "Nobody's getting left behind," he stated firmly, leaving Leo stunned by the man's sheer, insane audacity. Our hero adjusted his grip on his blade, declaring that it's the burden of an adult to shield the young from the dark. He swore he was bringing everyone home, and then, in a blur of motion, he charged the monster while the children watched in awe. Meanwhile, near the surface, the fleeing party was struggling through the winding, oppressive tunnels of the labyrinth. Vane's thugs were already whining, complaining about being trapped in a cursed dungeon where they couldn't even stand and fight. Captain Thorne told them to shut it, pointing out the exit just ahead, though his mind was still on Alistair and those children. He couldn't shake the nagging doubt. Had he made a fatal mistake by leaving the boy's life in the hands of a stranger? Suddenly, one of the scouts let out a shout, pointing toward the gate with a look of pure, unadulterated horror on his face. The exit wasn't just closing. It was vanishing into thin air, leaving the entire group of knights utterly stranded in the dark. Panic erupted instantly, and Baron Vane grabbed Thorn by the collar, screaming for some kind of plan to get them out. Thorn realized the terrifying truth. The gate had appeared far too early, and its disappearance meant the dungeon was beginning to collapse. Normally, a malfunction takes a week to trigger, but this time, their luck had completely and utterly run out. He suspected the kids were the catalyst for this nightmare, but his thoughts were cut short by his men frantically begging for a plan. Thorn tried to stay calm, explaining that the only way to reopen the gate was to slay the beast at the dungeon's heart. Vane laughed bitterly. There was no way a group of copper-tier knights could survive a labyrinth that far exceeded their skill. With that, Arthur realized the grim truth. Failure meant rotting in this abyss forever, but Sir Alistair explained the rift would only open once the nightmare ended. It was a suicide mission, but their only shot at survival, so the captain urged everyone to stay frosty and think. Right then, Silas the scorpion spotted something moving in the shadows. Pure nightmare fuel, giant serpents completely surrounded the knights, and as the first beast lunged, Alistair roared for them to draw steel. Alistair counted 5 of the monsters. He figured even squires could win with a solid plan, so he ordered them to aim for the heads while Silas started shaking with fear. Without a second thought, Sir Alistair charged right at the massive beasts. He leaped, decapitating the first one in a single, glorious swing, but then a second serpent struck from his blind side. He barely managed to bring his shield up when a fellow hunter launched a fireball that was so wild, even Alistair had to dive for cover. Bad move. The attack only ticked the monster off, and it turned its rage toward the terrified mage. Alistair stepped in, shouting that the beast's fight was with him before cleanly taking its head. 2 down, 3 to go. Alistair scanned the remaining 3 serpents, and despite the impossible odds, he knew they could win this. Silas felt a wave of relief, thinking these overgrown snakes weren't actually that tough. But then he felt a chill. Standing right behind him was a massive, 3-headed purple monstrosity. The party froze in terror, realizing this was the true boss, while Alistair connected its sudden appearance to the weird rift anomalies. The great beast didn't wait, lashing out at the knights with a tail as heavy as a battering ram. Silas found himself cornered as his men screamed for help, but the coward chose his own skin over theirs and bolted. The man he left behind could only watch as death crawled closer. But before those jaws could snap shut, a projectile whistled through the air. Lady Alina had arrived. The markswoman stepped into the light, drawing the boss's aggro to give Sir Alistair a desperate opening. Alistair landed a massive blow, feeling a surge of hope that they only had 2 heads left to deal with. But then something impossible happened. The jagged wound on the monster's neck just closed. To his horror, a brand new head burst forth, and the beast was back at 100% strength. Alistair guessed the core weak spot was hidden, but before he could move, the 3-headed serpent's tail slammed him into stone, making him cough up blood. Alina watched her strongest ally fall, and as those glowing eyes turned toward her, she could only scream in absolute panic. But just as she was about to be swallowed whole, a shadow moved. Someone snatched her out of the air. It was Julian, our hero, sprinting through the chaos while cradling Lady Alina in his arms. She looked up at her savior, and despite the life-or-death situation, her face turned bright red. Stepping onto the battlefield, Julian told his battered allies to step back and let him handle this 3-headed freak. Alina was absolutely starstruck as Julian gently asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, but then the broken Alistair called out, asking where the orphans were and why Julian was alone. Julian assured him the children were safe before turning his gaze back to the massive problem at hand. He warned them the labyrinth was going terminal, the boss had abandoned its post, and the exit gate was gone. Alistair tried to apologize for the disaster, but Julian cut him off. This mess was way above a bronze rank's pay grade. Julian gave the exhausted man a nod of respect for holding out as long as he did. And then it was just him and the monster, face to face. Julian declared it was time for the real fight to begin and charged the beast like a bolt of lightning. He danced through the snapping jaws and lopped off a head, but 𝒂𝒅 yelled a warning about the regeneration. Julian watched the head grow back in real time and groaned. Why didn't anyone mention this annoying trait earlier? Seeing the beast recover instantly, Alina felt her hope shatter into a million pieces. Even the captain felt the cold touch of death, but Julian just told them to have a little faith. He dropped a weird joke about how you only give up when you're counting cabbages, leaving Alina completely confused by the timing. 𝒂𝒅 took the hint, stay positive and keep swinging until the very end. He offered to fight by Julian's side, but Julian told him to take it easy since he was still bleeding out. 𝒂𝒅 just smiled, feeling better than ever thanks to the incredible healing power Julian had just used on him. Lady Alara still had her doubts, but she decided to lend a hand anyway. Our hero was pleased, telling his allies to keep the faith. Continuous pressure would eventually expose the beast's weak point. And with that, Sir 𝒂𝒂𝒅 called for support. Round 2 was on. The violet beast coiled, ready to strike, and every knight was on high alert. Suddenly, boom, 𝒂𝒂𝒅 took a direct hit from a massive fire blast. The group froze in horror, thinking no one could survive tanking that level of heat. But the second the flames stopped spouting from the beast's maw, 𝒂𝒂𝒅 burst through the smoke, charging hard. "Tricks like that don't work on me," he shouted, closing the gap in a heartbeat. A flurry of precise steel followed. Slash, slash, slash. The monster was hacked into complete pieces. The veterans couldn't believe their eyes. A low-tier squire fighting like a legendary knight. Those skills were far beyond any normal rank. Wait, something was wrong. 𝒂𝒂𝒅 noticed it immediately. The monster wasn't staying down. Regeneration. Talk about annoying. He needed a real solution and fast. Then he looked at the cliffs above and a plan formed in his mind. He didn't waste a second. 𝒂𝒂𝒅 scaled the cliffside in a blur of motion, and once he reached the summit, he put everything into one strike, cleaving a massive boulder clean in half. The falling rock had one target, that regenerating serpent right below. Crunch, the beast was flattened, for good this time. Silence fell over the ruin. Then the magical system pinged, the dungeon was conquered. Knight Captain Arthur just stood there, absolutely stunned. Pure joy broke out, a miraculous victory. The squad leader breathed a massive sigh of relief, knowing 𝒂𝒂𝒅 had just saved them from a brutal end. Just like that, the portal back to the kingdom flickered into existence. 𝒂𝒂𝒅 turned to the group, calmly checking to see if anyone was injured. Sir Arthur admitted they owed him everything. This young man gave off the same aura as a seasoned, professional war veteran. He began to admire the prodigy, but 𝒂𝒂𝒅 just shrugged it off. "Let's head home." Later that day at the Azure Order headquarters, the report was causing absolute chaos. A mere squire soloing a high-tier ruin. It sounded impossible. Knight Captain Arthur was the one presenting the facts to the High Council. He swore on his honor it was no lie. They had to recruit this prodigy into the elite ranks immediately. But as he kept explaining, the man in the high chair urged him to shut up. Even if the ruin was dangerous, there was no way a talent like that would stay hidden until now. It didn't make sense. Arthur tried to defend his report, but the boss wasn't having it. "I'll act like I never saw this." The captain had no choice but to accept it. Once the room was empty, the man exhaled, deeply, a heavy sigh of relief. The Grandmaster Knight then looked toward the shadows. "You can come out now." 𝒂𝒂𝒅 stepped out. "Is the captain gone?" Cedric confirmed it, noting that his lies should have shaken the man off. The Grandmaster warned him. The stir he caused today was bound to attract some very dangerous attention. But 𝒂𝒂𝒅 knew he had no choice. He only stepped back in to save those young lives that are always at stake. Baffled, the Grandmaster looked at the old soul in a young body. "Was the report true? Did you really do it?" 𝒂𝒂𝒅 nodded. The High Council knows their ranking system is broken, and their silence is the proof. But that wasn't the only issue. Cedric was shocked by 𝒂𝒂𝒅's theory, that the council itself was the puppet master behind the groups using children as bait. Still unable to believe it, he asked 𝒂𝒆𝒅 where he could possibly get that kind of information. So the old hero revealed the truth. He had just finished raiding a scavenger stronghold by himself. Cedric grew frustrated. The elites would never admit their sins, not when their power is built on their perfect and imposing presence. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 agreed. That kind of ego was exactly what he expected. Then he asked the Grandmaster point-blank, "Are you going to stay silent about their crimes?" Cedric explained the harsh reality. They didn't have the hard evidence needed to make a move. The enemy was growing faster than expected, and they couldn't be reckless. He remembered his master's lesson: always be careful with dangerous foes. And so, 𝒂𝒆𝒅 proposed digging through the secret archives of the ruin raids, but Cedric stopped him right there. He reminded the hero that he was still a squire on paper, and those records were only for high-ranking knights. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 sighed. This secret identity stuff was becoming seriously exhausting. But the Grandmaster saw an opportunity. He handed 𝒂𝒆𝒅 a piece of paper, and one look at it left our hero completely shocked. The following morning at the Knights Guild, a massive crowd had already swarmed the main hall, forming a line that stretched out the door. A guild official barked orders at the applicants to form a disciplined line, and right in the middle was a visibly shaken Penelope Thorne. Poor Penny was a nervous wreck. This was her very first rank advancement trial, and honestly, she didn't think she stood a chance. Still, she told herself the experience alone was worth the sweat, though her mind kept drifting, wondering if Arthur Sterling would actually show up to take the test too. She even started daydreaming about some secret, deeper connection between them. You know, the kind of romance you see in stories. But she shut that down real quick, calling her own thoughts ridiculous. Then, out of nowhere, a shadow loomed over her, complaining about how packed the hall was. Penny didn't hesitate. She snapped at the man for trying to cut the line right in front of her. The knight turned around, and man, he decided to flex. He flashed his crimson seal, and Penny froze. That meant he was a high-tier gold rank warrior. He looked her up and down with total contempt, mocking the basic iron ribbon she was still wearing on her wrist. But Penny wasn't backing down, telling him that a high rank didn't give him a free pass to be a jerk. The gold ranker just scoffed. "In this world, kid, power is the only law that matters." To him, that was just the harsh, unchangeable truth of the life they lived. Then his eyes shifted. He decided Penny was exactly his type, which, understandably, left her completely creeped out and confused. He reached out and grabbed her shoulder, asking if she was seeing anyone. But before he could say another word, a hand clamped down on his wrist like a vice. It was Arthur. The old veteran demanded to know why there was so much noise in such a crowded place. Penny could hardly believe her eyes, meeting him again like this. The bully immediately assumed the worst, sneering that the two of them must already be a couple. Arthur was just left confused by the accusation, while Penny turned betrayed and denied everything. That's when the man noticed Arthur was wearing an iron ribbon too. Talk about arrogant. The guy tried to assert dominance, shoving his crimson seal right in Arthur's face to see if he'd flinch. Arthur just gave him a flat look, affirming he knew exactly what rank the guy was. This absolutely triggered the bully. How dare an iron ranker look at him with such disrespect? He tried to rip his hand away, but his eyes went wide with pure shock. Arthur was holding him perfectly still, restraining a gold ranker with just one hand. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How could a copper-level nobody have this much raw, terrifying strength? Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, telling Baron Baxley to knock it off and stop making a scene. The bully turned around ready to scream at whoever dared to interrupt him, but his jaw dropped. It was the guild's head security. As the guards dragged him toward the exit, they told Baxley to stop making a fuss. He screamed that he'd never forget their faces, but to Arthur, he just looked like a total buffoon. Penny thanked Arthur for the save, and he just casually asked if she was still planning to go through with the trial after all that drama. She confirmed she was, saying these trials were rare and worth the shot, even if she felt like she might fail miserably. Without a word, Arthur reached out and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. He looked her in the eye and told her she'd be just fine. "Don't overthink it," he said. "Just do what you can." That was it. Penny's face went bright red, and her heart started hammering against her ribs like a drum. She usually wasn't into guys with that seasoned vibe, but Arthur just felt like a real man. Right then, he decided to give her a little gift. She expected something epic, but instead, he handed her a piece of plum cake. It was a traditional, old-school treat, the kind older folks usually love. Arthur had planned to eat it himself, but decided she needed the sugar more. He told her that something sweet would settle her nerves, then waved goodbye and wished her luck on the exam. Penny stared at the unexpected gift, laughing to herself about the strange taste. "He really does have the taste of an old man," she whispered, taking a bite as she watched him walk away. Meanwhile, up on a nearby balcony, a mysterious woman watched from the shadows, sighing with disappointment because she really wanted to see Arthur absolutely wreck that gold rancor. She wasn't worried, though. She was certain their paths would cross again very soon. Back in the hall, Baxley was still fuming over Arthur's inhuman strength when Commander Kendrick stepped forward, introducing himself as the lead examiner. He gathered the candidates, announcing that the session was about to begin with the official briefing on the trial process. Silence fell over the room as Kendrick began the explanation. Step 1, one-on-one duels between the lower-ranked knights. You win by either a total knockout or making your opponent surrender. He made it clear that safety was a priority. If things got too dangerous, the examiners would step in immediately to keep the peace. The commander then added the real kicker. The winners would then be evaluated by a high-ranking supervisor in a final sparring match. The crowd murmured. If you couldn't hold your own in the duel or impress the supervisor, it was game over. You failed the exam. But Kendrick offered a bit of hope. Even if you lost the fight, the supervisor could still pass you if they saw true potential and skill. And with that, he dropped the hammer. Good luck to you all, you're going to need it. Upon hearing the news, a hulking man in the crowd began to tremble with pure excitement. Silas the Scorpion was thrilled. Finally, a chance to enter the knightly ranks. Ever since that last catacomb raid, his mana had mysteriously skyrocketed, giving him the confidence to challenge almost any elite knight. The brute felt a strange debt to our hero, knowing this power came from Arthur's insane performance. This was it. This duel would finally grant him that promotion he had been chasing for years. But the moment he checked his assigned opponent, he froze. It was none other than the young Prodigy himself, offering a very cheerful greeting. Arthur Vance asked the man to go easy on him, but Silas knew the truth. Victory? Yeah, that was officially impossible. Later, as the trials continued, Lady Beatrice stepped onto the field for her own sparring match. Her opponent was already gasping for air, looking completely spent. Seeing her chance, she notched an arrow and unleashed her signature Gale Strike skill. The poor guy was absolutely terrified. He tried his best to block the incoming shot, but the impact sent him spiraling through the air. Just like that, the young challenger was crushed, marking a swift victory for Lady Beatrice. Honestly, she looked completely shocked by her own power. The archer sat there wondering about her sudden strength when Arthur approached. She asked if he had already finished his fight, which he calmly confirmed. As the head examiner ordered the defeated opponent to leave the dueling grounds, the girl whispered about how bizarre everything felt. Our hero listened closely as she explained that her magic power had grown both mysteriously and exponentially. So, our hero explained that this massive power boost was a direct result of that high-level quest, even though the girl didn't quite grasp the concept. Arthur told her that slaying beasts inside those dark catacombs allows a warrior to absorb their soul stones and raw magical essence. Basically, the higher the rank of the quest, the more power you gain, and the purer those essence stones become for the user. Beatrice's eyes began to sparkle with pure greed. If she cleared the hardest dungeons, she could climb the social ranks in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, our hero snapped her back to the real world with a look of genuine anger. The irritated man snapped that low-rank squires stand no chance in those hellish depths. It was a miracle they survived the last one without dying. He scolded her right then and there, stating that being reckless is the quickest way for a knight to meet an early grave. As Arthur continued his little rant, Lady Beatrice, who thought she was the older one, started feeling like she was being lectured by a grumpy grandfather. Suddenly, a graceful woman approached them, asking about the commotion. She immediately teased them, asking if this was just a little lover's quarrel. While Beatrice seemed surprisingly delighted by the awkward misunderstanding, our hero firmly corrected her. This wasn't a quarrel, not even close. It was just a stern scolding for a foolish child. Beatrice looked absolutely crushed, while the protagonist turned to apologize for causing such a scene. The lady found him quite amusing and recognized him as Arthur Vance. Our hero was visibly shocked that someone like her knew his name. That is when the crowd recognized the woman as Duchess Seraphina, the legendary Grandmaster. Everyone started wondering what a high-ranking paladin was doing here. The lady remembered her manners and introduced herself, explaining that she was actually the high official responsible for organizing this entire exam. This made Arthur realize she was a heavy hitter from the association. He asked her straight up if she actually needed something from him. Seraphina mentioned that a wild rumor was spreading about a common squire who had managed to clear a high-level catacomb all by himself. The entire crowd began whispering and speculating. Was the rumor really about Arthur? Was it even possible, or was the whole thing just a lie? This really annoyed our hero. He hated the spotlight. He looked the Grandmaster in the eye and asked if she had come specifically to see him. To everyone's shock, Seraphina did something wild. She offered him a direct path to ascend immediately to the rank of baronet. She told him that if the rumors were even half true, then an offer like this should be far too tempting to turn down. While our indifferent hero prepared to refuse, the overexcited archer immediately shouted her acceptance on his behalf before he could say a word. Then an elite knight volunteered to be the opponent. To skip ranks, a candidate must defeat a baronet first. Arthur recognized the man from before. The baronet, Sir Alistair, expressed his genuine surprise at finding out that this young man was the legendary Prodigy from the stories. Once the crowd recognized this specific knight, they started murmuring about how he was nearly a master knight. His presence meant the association didn't want Arthur skipping any ranks easily. The Grandmaster thanked the man for his generous offer, while our hero tried to insist that he didn't actually want the promotion yet. But right then, he noticed the knight lunging with a lethal thrust. He barely managed to dodge, rolling across the stone floor to safety. Sir Alistair noted that the boy might actually have the reflexes of a baronet, considering how he just managed to evade that strike. Arthur was fuming. It was incredibly annoying that these elites were going so hard for a test he didn't even want to take. Hearing this, the knight looked disappointed. He told the boy that giving up at the start was pathetic. Skipping the knight rank isn't easy. The baronet vowed that he would do everything in his power to ensure the hero failed his promotion today. He was ready to go all the way, even if it meant breaking every bone in the boy's body or sending him to the afterlife. Lady Alara watched from the sidelines, thinking what a waste Julian was. He had the raw power of a gold knight, but his ego was absolutely insufferable. She couldn't help but wonder, how was our veteran hero going to handle a brat with that much talent? Sir Alaric sighed heavily, wondering aloud if there was a spell or a potion somewhere that could fix a man's personality as easily as sharpening a sword. Julian didn't have a clue what he was muttering about and demanded an explanation, while Alaric just stood there, trying to figure out how to beat some sense into a head that seemed immune to logic. Alaric just gave him a cold, steady look before calmly stating that he was simply deciding on the best way to discipline him. And yeah, that didn't go over well. The young knight was absolutely fuming. Insulted beyond belief, Julian decided it was time to make the old man bleed, summoning his spirit lance and charging with everything he had. But Alaric, stone cold. Instead of dodging the lethal strike, he reached out and caught the lance bare-handed, leaving Julian completely baffled. The entire courtyard went dead silent. catching a magic-infused weapon that is simply unheard of. That was the final straw. Alaric decided right then and there to beat the arrogance out of this silver rank noble, and the sheer intensity of his gaze silenced everyone present. Julian's pride was hurting more than his pride, but Alaric was about to show him the massive gap between a loud mouth and a true legend. That's when it hit him. Julian finally felt it. The old man's presence was suddenly enormous, suffocating, and utterly terrifying. His instincts screamed at him to run, and he scrambled back, unable to even process the raw power he was sensing. In that moment, facing Alaric didn't feel like a duel anymore. It felt like being a rabbit at the mercy of a starving wolf. Through the panic, he remembered that a platinum-rank grandmaster was watching his every move. Terrified of being humiliated by a supposed amateur, he unleashed the trump cards he'd been saving for the royal trials, stacking 3 physical enhancement buffs on himself at once. Alara leaned in, actually excited to see the boy finally fighting at his peak. She was expecting a real show. But Julian knew he was in trouble. Those buffs would only last 5 minutes, and the clock was ticking down fast. He prepared to launch a desperate final assault, only to realize Alaric was already standing right in front of him, fingers poised for a simple flick. "Physical discipline is the only thing brats like you understand," Alaric muttered, before dropping the young knight with a mere flick to the forehead. Julian hit the ground in a daze, his head spinning as he tried to figure out how a finger flick had more power than a warhammer. But wait, the lesson wasn't over. Alaric wasn't done yet, and with another casual gesture, he sent the boy tumbling across the dirt again, making sure the point hit home. "Just surrender," Alaric advised, but the noble's pride was too thick. Julian swung his lance again, only for the old man to dance around it like it was child's play. It was exactly what Alaric expected. Some students just need a much longer tutoring session to learn their place. Suddenly, the Grandmaster herself stepped in to stop the slaughter. She told Julian flat out that the fight was over, but the boy was too stubborn to accept the obvious defeat. Alara sighed, muttering about how unattractive desperate men are, before burying a heavy kick into Julian's gut to end the discussion for good. She told him to take whatever was left of his dignity and disappear. After dismissing him, she turned to Sir Alaric with a bright smile, admitting she never doubted him for a second, a level of trust that actually intrigued our hero. Alara teased that she only associates with the very best of men, while the young markswoman nearby watched the flirting in absolute horror. Then, the Grandmaster suggested they take their conversation somewhere more private, inside her personal laboratory. Alaric casually agreed, and while Alara was thrilled, the bronze-rank squire was practically vibrating with jealous rage. Once inside, the lady apologized for the chaotic state of her workshop. It was a mess of scrolls and alchemy tools. She offered him a drink from her private stock, warned him, though, she has very particular tastes that most people can't handle. Alaric took a sip, set the glass down, and asked the Duchess the real reason for this secret meeting. She didn't beat around the bush. She invited the protagonist to join the royal citadel directly, leaving him completely stunned. According to the alchemist, the crown is always on the hunt for legendary talent to join their inner circle. But Alaric was confused. Why offer a prestigious spot like that to a man who had only just climbed back up from the bottom ranks? Alara smirked, admitting she had an ulterior motive, before pulling a veil off a mysterious, glowing machine that left the old man baffled. She explained to our clueless hero that this artifact was actually a ruin-scrying relic. Alaric's senses sharpened as she explained that this device was the key to the Citadel's growing power in the kingdom. This relic allowed knights to measure the danger level of a rift before entering, unlike the old days, when thousands of men were sent to their deaths in unknown dungeons. The scientist then leaned in, pointing out that Alaric himself must be. He knew the scrying artifact was flawed, a total setup, proof the royal order was hiding the truth. Lady Alina admitted the error rate was slim, but then she asked, would knights even care if they knew? Sir Alistair didn't hesitate. Squires would think twice about charging the front lines if they knew their lives were a gamble. The scholars exchanged looks. They knew he was right about that reaction. One tiny mistake, and the ranks would crumble, leaving the entire kingdom defenseless, all because of a small miscalculation. But Alistair stood his ground. Every warrior deserved the truth, or they'd just be fodder for the demons. The scholars disagreed. To them, the logical choice was simple: sacrifice the few to save the many. That response, it absolutely set him off. Our hero snapped back. A knight chooses when to die. Letting them bleed for a lie, that's not honor, it's murder. The sorceress went quiet. She realized her guest had just spat on her offer. Alistair stood to leave, telling her to deliver a very personal insult to her masters on his behalf. She watched him go, admiring his fire but certain that his righteousness would eventually be his grave. Alistair stepped out of the citadel, looking absolutely drained from the political circus. He sighed, thinking how his old apprentice would fume over this. Then, a voice called out, leaving him intrigued. Sir Alistair recognized that face instantly. The man gave him a small, knowing smile. Meanwhile, a secret file reached the High Lord. A solo dungeon clear by a prodigy. The master was impressed. "Yes, my lord," the man confirmed. He just hit veteran rank after slaying the beast of the north. The name on the parchment, Sir Alistair, a name that brought a wicked grin to the master's face. A young squire eventually led our hero back to see his superior. As the report detailed how he skipped entire ranks, Alistair did his best to avoid the paragon's furious glare. He could feel the heat of his student's anger as the man mentioned Alistair's growing fame. The paragon knight then cleared the room. He wanted a private word with the so-called prodigy. The infuriated student demanded an explanation, but after hearing the story, he realized Alistair had been played by a leaner. Now that caught our hero completely off guard. Lord Cedric explained that a leaner was a newly crowned high sorceress, a major power player in the capital. Her proposal was a leash. She wanted to recruit anyone who realized the Order's artifacts were broken. The promotion trial was a sham. If he had failed, she would have silenced him forever. That's just how she works. The paragon shook his head. Refusing her must have made her blood boil. You ruined her whole plan. Alistair just puffed out his chest. He took full credit for that rejection. But Cedric warned him, that lady is persistent. Her next move was what worried him. So Cedric offered him a spot in his own great house. Alistair shot him down instantly. The response left the young lord absolutely stunned. He insisted that being a lone wolf was suicide. The Azure Sentinels were a top 5 guild. They could protect him. Yet our hero didn't even blink. Alistair reminded him. He was the legendary warrior who needed no shield and took no bribes from the Order. You already fell for one trick today, Cedric sighed. Alistair just waved it off like it was nothing. The paragon let out a disappointed breath, finally deciding to respect his old master's stubborn wish. Just watch your back, the student warned. Have a little faith, the veteran replied with a smirk. As he headed for the gates, a girl practically tackled him. It was Lady Jane, completely out of breath. The young marksman beamed, proudly holding up her new squire's badge for him to see. She passed, and she was adamant Alistair was the only reason she made it through. Our hero chuckled, asking if that was the only reason she'd been chasing him down. Face turning bright red, she stammered that she just wanted to thank him for giving her courage. She quickly tried to change the subject. So, did you actually join the Azure Sentinels? Alistair told her the truth. He was staying a free agent. The girl looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Suddenly, a mysterious stranger stepped out of the crowd and headed straight for our hero, Alaric. This guy was a shady scout named Julian, who claimed to be the talent hunter for the House of the Northern Star. The name definitely caught Alaric's attention, so Julian wasted no time bragging about how their guild, ranked 11th in the entire kingdom, was looking for a powerhouse just like him. Seeing the doubt on Alaric's face, Julian doubled down, insisting that they were indeed the 11th most powerful house in the land. Then he noticed Alaric's silence and pointed out a very interesting fact. Our boy still hadn't joined any noble house, and when Julian asked if he had a plan, Alaric dropped a bombshell. He preferred to work solo. Alaric turned to leave, but Julian completely panicked, begging him to at least check out their presentation before walking away, which actually piqued Alara's interest. Julian quickly explained the deal. The House of the Northern Star was hosting an event to show off their strength, and as a bonus, they were handing out free Iron Tier weapons to everyone who showed up. Alara was practically vibrating with excitement over the free gear, but she wasn't totally naive. She asked what the guild was actually getting out of such a crazy giveaway. Julian played it off cool, claiming they just wanted to recruit top talent while boosting their reputation among the local knights. Alaric was skeptical as hell, but before he could say no, his friend dragged him toward the event. They arrived at the guild's massive headquarters. Alara was amazed by the sheer number of people gathered for the 11th best guild, while Alaric, our resident tiger-hearted warrior, just grumbled about being forced to come along. She insisted it was worth it for the free weapon, though Alaric wasn't convinced it was worth the headache. The girl was just hyped for some free loot after her recent promotion, but Alaric, he knew something was definitely off about this generous giveaway. Still, Alara argued there was nothing to worry about since the Northern Star was one of the most respected houses around. Alaric just sighed, realizing how simple-minded his friend was and how incredibly fishy this entire setup felt. A few minutes later, Alara started getting nervous. The waiting room they'd been led into was completely, eerily empty. Then, out of nowhere, a chilling laugh echoed through the room. It was Julian, and he looked a lot less friendly now. Before Alaric could demand an answer, a group of heavily armed soldiers swarmed the room, surrounding him and Alara. The shady goons dropped the act and declared that the enrollment process was officially starting. Caught in a trap, Alaric stood his ground and demanded an explanation, telling them they couldn't just kidnap people into their guild. Julian just smirked, saying nobody would get hurt as long as they signed the contract, but Alaric's next question was simple. What happens if I say no? The man snapped his fingers, his expression turning cold as he hinted that things were about to get very, very ugly. As the soldiers prepared to strike, Julian tried to intimidate him one last time, making Alara go into full panic mode. But then Alaric did the unthinkable and agreed. Alaric calmly told them he'd sign the papers, which was music to Julian's ears. As Julian handed over the parchment, he was already celebrating inside. Once that ink hit the page, a powerful curse would trigger, turning the Prodigy into a mindless puppet for the Northern Star. But here's the twist. Alaric refused to sign until he met the guild master face-to-face, insisting on knowing exactly who he was working for, and Julian agreed, certain that our hero's little plan would fail anyway. He contacted the leader immediately, who sent word that he'd be there in just a few moments. Lord Alastair, the feared leader of the Northern Star, was thrilled to hear about Julian's progress with the new recruit. Julian told the Duke the boss was on his way, and seeing the terrifying look on the goons' faces, Alara started apologizing to Alaric for dragging him into this nightmare. Alaric shook it off, telling her it wasn't her fault. Julian came for him specifically, which meant he was the target from the very beginning. The terrified girl whispered to him, asking if he was actually going to sign away his soul. He told her to relax and that he'd handle the situation, but Alara was still shaking in her boots. Suddenly, a booming laugh shattered the silence of the room. Lord Alastair made his grand entrance, introducing himself to Alaric, while the entire guild bowed down in absolute respect. Julian nearly had a heart attack when Alaric casually asked Alastair if he was really the one calling the shots, causing the scout to scream for respect before the Lord silenced him. The Diamond Tier hunter actually liked Alaric's attitude, leaning in close and placing a hand on his shoulder, while admitting he had massive expectations for the boy. Alaric looked him dead in the eye and asked if he always lied through his teeth to get what he wanted. Alastair didn't even flinch, explaining that everything he did was for the glory of his guild, the 11th best in the kingdom. He admitted they were stuck at that rank because they were missing one key element, a sovereign-tier warrior. Then he pointed right at Alaric, claiming the boy had the rare potential to become that legendary rank. That was the real reason behind his ruthless recruitment tactics. He was convinced Alaric was the missing piece they needed to reach the top. With that, the Lord Commander officially welcomed the young recruit into the fold, promising him gold and glory beyond his wildest dreams. Master Thorn just stood there, cool as ice, and asked the villain if he had any last words. Talk about a power move. It left the entire gang of thugs completely speechless. One lackey tried to get fresh, but Thorn wasn't having it. He caught the guy's wrist midair and smashed an elbow right into his jaw. Brutal. The room went dead silent. Nobody expected those kinds of reflexes from an old-timer. Sir Julian, oh, he was absolutely fuming. Then Thorn started preaching. He called out the Iron Rose, mocking how a top-tier, knightly order had to resort to kidnapping and forced labor just to fill their ranks. He pointed straight at their boss and dropped the truth bomb. They weren't heroes. They were just common criminals wearing fancy armor. That touched a nerve. The Baron was seeing red, absolutely losing it over Thorn's righteous attitude. Time for a painful lesson in humility, apparently. He unleashed his signature magic, the freezing thicket. Sharp shards of ice shot toward Thorn. Our hero. He stayed on high alert, ready for the impact. Julian started cackling, convinced the old man was about to become a human popsicle. Honestly, he thought it was exactly what Thorn deserved. But check this out. Thorn just flexed his magic and literally shattered the ice right off his body. The Baron's jaw hit the floor. He was totally baffled. Thorn didn't waste a second. He lunged at Julian like a lightning bolt. Panicking, the ice mage tried to throw up a frost shield, but it was too little, too late. Thorn just grunted, useless, before burying a massive fist into the guy's face. Julian went down hard, groaning in pure agony. Down for the count. Even the Lord Commander was stunned. I mean, Julian might not be a brawler, but he's an A-rank mage, knocked out in one hit, unheard of. The Baron clicked his tongue in annoyance, realizing he'd messed up. This old man had been hiding some serious, god-tier power the whole time. Desperate now, the leader of the Iron Rose barked at his remaining men to swarm our hero all at once. Suddenly, one of the goons tried to sneak up and get a cheap shot from behind with a blade. Thorn didn't even look. He slipped the blade, hammered the guy into the dirt, and used his back as a literal springboard to launch a flying kick right into the Baron's face. 2 more elite hunters, gone in the blink of an eye. But wait, the big boss was finally done playing around. He was ready to strike. The Baron swung a blade of pure fire, but Thorn danced away, creating some much-needed breathing room between him and his opponent. Now the villain was pulling out the big guns, the Drake's Ember Blade, a legendary S-tier weapon. He started trash-talking Thorn, acting like he'd already won. The guild leader was grinning now. In his mind, as long as he had the Ember Blade unsheathed, victory was a 100% guarantee. Thorn admitted the sword looked decent. The thug bragged that he'd looted it from an S-rank dungeon, claiming it gave him the power of a demigod. Thorn just sighed and started scolding the brat like a disappointed grandfather. He told him straight up, relying on a shiny sword just proves how weak you actually are. The Baron snapped, swinging wildly, but Thorn dodged every single strike with ease. The guy was losing his mind. No matter how hard he swung that legendary blade, he couldn't even graze Thorn's cloak. The old master just kept talking. He explained that no matter the guild or the gear, the skill gap was a mountain. The Baron was simply outclassed. Now completely unhinged, the A-rank hunter screamed at Thorn, telling him he had no right to talk down to him like that. That's when Thorn finally drew his own blade. With one smooth motion, he parried the legendary Ember Blade like it was made of cardboard. The Baron couldn't believe it. An S-rank weapon, stopped by an inferior sword. Thorn decided it was time for a little physical discipline to straighten the kid out. Lord Baron felt his stomach cave in as Thorn delivered a thunderous punch right to his solar plexus. Ouch, that's gotta hurt. Flashback time. We see the Baron years ago, watching his best knight walk away. The young man claimed he had his own path to follow, leaving the guild leader devastated. Back then, the Baron actually had a heart. He was full of hope and passion for the future of his men. But he couldn't stop people from leaving. He kept hoping that if he just played fair, they'd come back. Then, a mysterious man arrived with a cold truth. The stranger told him that his Star Knight had joined a stronger guild because he craved power. Real power, not some small-town dream. That's when it clicked for the Baron. If he wanted to be big, he had to stop playing nice. His noble dreams were worthless in the face of strength. From that day on, he threw his morals in the trash. He became the ruthless, shameless predator we see today. Whenever he saw talent, he tried to scout it. And if they dared to say no, he made sure they suffered. Revenge was his new recruitment tool. It worked. His guild shot up to rank 11 in the country. Any guilt he felt, buried under piles of influence and success. Back in the present, the guild master wakes up looking up at a massive, towering knight. Baron demanded to know who the hell he was. The shock hit him like a truck. Standing there was the Grandmaster of the Royal Azure Knights. The Baron started panicking. This presence was totally unexpected. Then he noticed Thorn. His entire squad of elites were pinned down, unable to even twitch a finger. The Baron started sweating, wondering if this old monster was secretly a high-ranking member of the Royal Azure Knights. Hearing that, Thorn just gave the kid a good smack on the head. He warned him that if he said anything that stupid again, he wouldn't be so gentle next time. The S-rank Grandmaster finally stepped in to clear things up. He told the Baron that Thorn wasn't his subordinate, which honestly just made the villain even more confused. To his absolute shock, the truth of the situation was about to become a nightmare he couldn't escape. Arthur Sterling dropped a bombshell. He's actually in our hero's debt. Seeing a legendary Grand Commander bowing to a kid, everyone was losing their minds. Who is this guy, really? And then, Master Alistair turned to the thugs. He asked them straight up, were they really forced into this life of crime? Silas Vance didn't flinch. He claimed he did whatever it took to make his syndicate #1 in the underworld. But Alistair wasn't buying it. He asked if a bunch of liars and thieves really deserved to be called the best in the kingdom. That hit a nerve. Silas snapped, shouting that even if his methods were dirty, they were the only reason his house ever rose through the ranks. He'd finally built his empire, right? But Alistair just looked at him. Was this really the legacy he wanted? Silas was fuming, his frustration boiling over. Finally, Silas broke. He admitted the Sovereign Council only favors the High Lords, leaving the rest of them to rot or turn to crime just to survive. He swore on his life that as a leader, he'd do anything, absolutely anything, to make his people prosper. Honestly, you could feel the weight of it. His men were actually moved by that kind of raw determination. But then came the curveball. Alistair asked, "What if the council changed? Would you change with it?" Silas just froze in total shock. He didn't believe it for a second. To him, that kind of talk was pure fantasy. He'd seen how the council was untouchable, growing more corrupt as the great houses hoarded all the power. They're at the top of the world and they aren't moving, period. But then, Alistair promised he'd be the one to change the entire system. Silas was stunned. Even the Grand Commander looked at our hero like, "Wait, you've actually got a plan for this." And there it was. The legendary knight revealed his true goal. He's going to dismantle the entire organization by building his own elite squad. Outside, Lady Alara was practically glued to the door, trying to catch every single word of their conversation. She couldn't wrap her head around it. How does this random young man talk to the most powerful men in the country like they're old drinking buddies? But wait, it gets better. She realized our hero has the kind of insane potential that only comes once in a century. Now she's officially intrigued. Suddenly, the doors flew open. Our hero and the Grand Commander stepped out of the room. Alara rushed him immediately, demanding to know his real identity. Meanwhile, Sir Liam was losing it, asking why he hadn't mentioned he was tight with his own superior. Alistair just looked on, amused. While they were busy crowding the protagonist, the tall one just watched from the shadows. silent, observing every move. Just a few minutes earlier, the student had asked the old master what would happen to those thugs. Alistair's answer, classic. He pointed out that every human needs a real chance to show what they're actually made of. He wanted to give Silas a chance to prove his worth. Maybe the guy just never had a fair shot at being a real hero before. According to the old man, the leader of the Northern Light didn't just get a lecture. He got a wake-up call he'll never forget. The S-rank knights just shook their heads. 10 years apart and their master hasn't changed one bit. Same old Alistair. That same night, deep in a private training hall, a mountain of a man was pushing his limits. Lord Cedric of House Ironpeak was absolutely exhausted from his workout. He finally dropped the massive weights. Clang! Just then a scout rushed in. "My lord, someone from the Sovereign Council is here to see you." Cedric stiffened. That's never good news. He started bracing for the absolute worst. Enter Sir Percival, the leader of the Council's Violent Crimes Division. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He stood before Lord Cedric, the S-rank leader of the Grizzly Legion, one of the top 10 powerhouses in the entire realm. Cedric didn't play games. "Get to the point," he growled. "I don't recall being involved in any crimes lately." Percival dropped a name. Silas Vance, the leader of the Shadow Syndicate. Big mistake. Cedric grabbed a weight and hurled it like a missile, but Percival didn't even blink. He remained completely unfazed. Cedric told him to watch his tone. Why would a High Lord care about a pathetic street-level guildmaster like that? And then the bombshell. Percival revealed that the miserable Silas had been taken down by a total nobody. A low ranker. Cedric was floored, baffled. "Okay," he said, settling in. "Now I'm ready to let you explain everything." A dark smile spread across his face. This was going to be good. Cut to Sir Liam, currently in a world of hurt against a two-headed cyclops. He charged in, blade flashing, and managed to land a solid hit. The beast let out a roar of agony that shook the ground. Liam leaped onto the monster's skull, trying to shatter its horn, but nothing, not a scratch. He was starting to get really irritated. Right then, our hero shouted from the sidelines, "Stop hitting the armor, target the soft spots." Liam scrambled to listen. Our hero, meanwhile, was wondering how his life became such a circus. It all started back when Liam begged the old man to be his master. Honestly, even our hero was a little intrigued by that request. Liam swore he'd reflected on it and decided he needed to follow Alistair to become a true knight. He was practically on his knees. But our hero wasn't feeling it. Why bother with an apprenticeship when the kid already works under a grand commander? It just seemed pointless. So the truth finally came out. The boy revealed that Lord Cedric was buried in noble duties and had given his full blessing for our hero to lead him, making Sir Alistair realize his former pupil had orchestrated this entire arrangement from the shadows. With the mystery solved, the old knight decided to officially take the young warrior under his wing, leaving the lad absolutely beaming with pure, unadulterated joy. Shifting back to the current heat of battle, the bronze-tier recruit actually pulled it off, successfully bringing down the massive twin-headed cyclops. As his master watched from the sidelines, pointing out exactly how much he'd improved, the young man couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Caspian was thrilled when the old master declared that at this rate, he'd definitely reach the silver tier in no time. But right in the middle of their heartwarming moment, the other knights nearby started grumbling, complaining that our hero was being far too arrogant and that they were doing all the heavy lifting while he just watched. This didn't go unnoticed by our protagonist, especially as the mercenaries whispered that it was nothing but dumb luck that allowed him to skip the lower training ranks entirely. Caspian was ready to draw his sword and defend his master's honor, but the old knight held him back. Alistair told him not to waste his breath on petty gossip, calmly stating they should just leave the conquered ruin behind. However, at that exact moment, a hooded figure watched their every move from the tree line. As the men were being sent home, a nervous-looking boy approached our hero. He looked shy, eyes downcast, as he asked if the rumors were true. Had Alistair really bypassed the beginner tiers? And when our hero asked why a kid like him was so curious, the boy, Arthur, suddenly begged Alastair to take him on as a second apprentice, claiming he wanted to be just as legendary. This caught both our master and Caspian completely off guard. Sir Alastair was stunned. He looked the boy over and asked if he really wanted a master he didn't even know, one with such a fearsome reputation. The kid froze, struggling to even find his words. Seeing this lack of spine, the old man tried to shoo him away, and the boy didn't even try to argue or stand his ground. Watching him walk away so easily made our hero wonder, did the boy even care about the request if he gave up that fast? The boy just sighed, muttering that he wouldn't blame anyone for rejecting a failure like him. That defeated attitude, it seriously rubbed our hero the wrong way. Right then, Caspian stepped in and suggested they actually give the kid a shot, arguing that it must have taken a lot of guts for someone that anxious to even ask, and honestly, having a sparring partner would be a huge help. But Alastair wasn't convinced. He believed teaching was a two-way street, and he couldn't waste time on someone who didn't seem to have the heart for it. Still, the boy insisted he was serious, only for his confidence to be completely crushed the second Alastair unleashed a wave of his terrifying, heavy aura. Caspian kept pushing, urging the old master to give him a chance. When Alastair asked why he was so determined to help a stranger, the gold-tier student stood tall, surprising his master by quoting the knightly code that Lady Aliner taught him, that they must offer a hand to anyone who truly seeks the path. Seeing that familiar, determined sparkle in his student's eyes, the old master finally gave in, agreeing to let the young lad join them on their next raid into the dark woods. Overcome with relief, the boy promised to give it his absolute all. It was only then that our hero realized he hadn't even asked for the kid's name yet. The boy introduced himself as Arthur. Once the formal introductions were done, Alastair nodded, admitting he was curious to see what the boy could actually do. Caspian then shook hands with his new fellow disciple, telling him they'd better get used to each other since they'd be spending a lot of time training in the mud. The overjoyed boy beamed, begging the high-ranking knight to look after him and teach him the ropes. As Caspian started acting like the big brother of the group, our hero just let out a heavy sigh, deciding he'd truly mentor Arthur, but only if the boy actually wanted to learn. A few days later, deep inside a cursed crypt, Alastair was left speechless by the boy's total lack of focus. He had to scream at him to move before lunging in to save him from being flattened by a giant beast at the very last second. Arthur stuttered out a thank you, but our protagonist was losing his patience. The kid was constantly distracted, and this was becoming a dangerous pattern. The boy begged for forgiveness as Alastair finally exploded in anger, shouting that a bronze-tier warrior who doesn't check his surroundings before charging is just a dead man walking. While Caspian tried to step in and play peacemaker to cool the old man down, Arthur apologized again, his head hanging low, while Alastair sat there wondering if he'd made a massive mistake by taking the boy in. The mood was heavy. As the sun began to set, Arthur found himself separated and standing face to face with a massive stone sentinel. Desperate, he channeled magic to empower his blade and struck with everything he had, but the weapon just bounced off the monster's hide. Just as the sentinel swung its massive fist for a counterattack, our hero blurred into motion, slicing the creature's arm clean off before it could land. He didn't stop there either. With one clean thrust, he shattered the monster's core. Once again, the young apprentice stood there, trembling and thankful for the rescue. But the scolding came immediately. Alastair barked at him for blindly attacking the thickest armor instead of looking for a weak point first. Arthur was crushed. After venting his frustration, our hero walked away, leaving his disciple alone in the dirt with nothing but his own crashing self-esteem. Caspian tried to cheer the kid up, telling him he'd do better during the next raid and not to take the master's temper to heart. But the boy didn't want to hear it. He just said he needed to be alone, leaving Caspian watching him walk off into the shadows with a worried look on his face. Later that night, deep in the silence of the dungeon, the sound of a fist slamming into stone echoed out. Arthur was no longer sad. He was absolutely consumed by rage. The young squire was fed up with being treated like dirt, and for a second, he actually thought about throwing in the towel. But he quickly shook it off. He just had to endure this for a little longer. The kid was determined to see this through to the end. Right then, Sir Cedric announced it was time to pull out of the monster-infested ruins. The boy didn't waste a second and scrambled to catch up with the group. Later, at the headquarters of House Azure, our legendary knight started moaning about the mountain of paperwork to his former student, who looked completely done with him. Duke Dabin finally snapped and asked the old man why on earth he'd chosen House Azure as his personal retirement home. Sir Percival just shrugged. An old relic like him, whose friends were either dead or buried, had nowhere else to go, before grumbling that the Duke shouldn't have saddled him with a pupil. Seeing as the old man practically lived there anyway. The Duke begged his master to just officially join House Azure, but Percival shut him down fast. Joining meant losing his precious freedom to some noble contract. The Duke was genuinely worried, though. The royal council was staying silent about the northern uprising, and he hated seeing his lone wolf of a master wandering around unprotected. Then Lord Dabin dropped a bombshell. There's a nasty rumor going around that he personally attends to the old knights. Every need. But Percival didn't see the problem. "We're friends, aren't we?" he asked, completely oblivious. The Duke had to spell it out. The rumor wasn't about friendship. People actually think they're in a secret romantic relationship. The old man nearly choked. He went ballistic, demanding to know which idiot was spreading such ridiculous gossip. Turns out the Duke's own knights started it. They saw how much their lord coddled this outsider and let their imaginations run wild. So the student gave his master an ultimatum. Either join the house officially or stop visiting for a while. Percival felt like a discarded relic, thinking his age made him an outcast, but Duke Dabin promised him that wasn't the case at all. Fine, Percival made his choice. He declared right then and there that he'd never set foot in House Azure ever again. But wait, the Duke warned him that the Crimson Bear Order is rumored to be digging into his legendary past. That name, Percival knew them. They were just like Baron Thorn and his band of thugs. The Duke confirmed the 10th and 11th factions were basically the same brand of trouble. With one massive difference. Their leader, Marquis Valerius, was a total wildcard. An unpredictable grandmaster with a reputation that was absolutely trashed. Percival just brushed it off. He told the leader of House Azure he'd be fine. He is a living legend, after all. And with that, the master marched out. But the student, he was fearing the absolute worst. Later that day, the hero checked to see if his squires were present. Both boys were there. Cedric assumed they were only called because some terrifying high-level threat had appeared. While young Julian was shaking with anxiety, the master set the record straight. They weren't there for a bloodbath. They were there for team bonding. Yeah, the boys were floored. The shy young squire actually looked like he might cry from pure relief. The old man realized he barely knew these kids. He wanted to use this chance to actually figure out who they were. The squires sheepishly agreed when he told them that rest was just as vital as combat training. Cedric asked, "All right, so what's the plan for today?" Percival thought for a second. Then he asked, "What do you youngsters even do for fun these days?" The boys were genuinely intrigued. The elite squire admitted he usually just goes on mountain treks or plays a game of strategy chess. Percival's eyes lit up. He was thrilled that the board game was still popular, especially since he was incredibly confident in his own skills. But just as Julian mentioned, how incredibly boring chess sounded to him. The old knight went off. He started defending his favorite game like a man possessed, before turning to his second squire to ask about his hobbies. The boy hesitated. A short while later, in a quiet library full of illustrated scrolls, our hero found himself peacefully reading. Percival figured these picture stories were what kids liked now, but Julian clarified it was just a personal hobby. They sat in silence as the old man started thinking. The boy was stressed, no surprise there. Percival finally asked him the big question, "Why did you even want to become a knight?" Julian took a breath. He confessed he'd been obsessed with hero tales since he was a tiny child. When the legendary knights first appeared, he was overjoyed. They looked exactly like the heroes from his favorite stories. He decided right then and there to become one himself. He wanted to live just like the legends he admired so much. When he muttered that it was just a childish dream, Percival stopped him. He told the boy there was no sin in a fantasy like that. Julian was stunned. His master actually called his dream beautiful. Right then, the protagonist was spotted by none other than Lady Alara. Earlier, she'd been fuming over some boring scroll. The whole thing felt completely meaningless to her. She couldn't get that average-looking knight out of her head. He was cool during the raid, sure, but that didn't explain why she was so attracted to him. To her, he felt different. He reminded her of her dear grandfather from years ago. While wondering what he might be doing, the marksman excused herself to go splash some water on her face. Alara was practically praying to see him, and just like that, there he was. Sir Alaric turned around, genuinely surprised and pleased to stumble upon the young Lady Penelope in a place like this. When she asked why he was there, the old knight explained he was just bonding with the youth. Penelope felt like luck was finally on her side. Suddenly, young Julian leaned in, whispering to our hero about his secret ties with such a beautiful lady. Alaric was caught off guard by the dating rumors, quickly denying it while Penelope's face turned bright red. He insisted she was just a simple acquaintance. The shy boy Julian tried to introduce himself, but Penelope snapped back in an upset tone that he just couldn't understand. Right then, Alara the mage arrived to check on her friend, only to find that they suddenly had company. Alara greeted the veteran knight before suggesting they move along, but after a quick farewell from the hero, Penelope hesitated. She didn't want their meeting to end so abruptly. So she impulsively invited the three of them to join her at the local tavern for music. The more, the merrier, right? Sir Alaric was about to decline, so he could get back to his scrolls and reading. But Julian jumped at the chance. He claimed this was a vital part of being young before asking his master if he'd mind. Even the stoic Sir Cedric didn't object. But soon, sitting in the tavern, Penelope began to seriously regret her impulsive invite. But then, she decided to pivot and use this as a chance to get closer to her crush. She invited the hero for a duet, but the old knight turned her down. He claimed he'd never even heard these modern ballads, pushing his student Julian to take the invite in his place. This was a disaster. Penelope was fuming as her perfect plan crumbled right before her eyes. She tried one more time, letting the knight pick any song he wanted. Alaric chose an ancient tune called Return My Youth and actually enjoyed it. The weird, old-fashioned song left her completely baffled. That's when Alara leaned in and whispered a question. Penelope nearly jumped when asked if she had feelings for our hero. Her burning red face was a dead giveaway to everyone. Mortified, she apologized for the awkward invitation, certain the legendary Alaric saw her as nothing more than a child. But to her shock, the mage grabbed her hand, promising to be her wingwoman. Penelope was nearly moved to tears by the support. Suddenly, bam, a perfect score of 100 appeared on the magic display. As Cedric showered his master with praise, the old man let it slip that people begged him to be a singer in his youth. He quickly caught the slip-up and brushed it off. Seizing the moment, the mage asked Alaric to help Penelope find her lost purse at the archive. Julian, being Julian, tried to volunteer his services, much to Penelope's absolute horror. Before he could ruin it, the mage kicked him hard under the table, cheerfully asking the old knight again while the others watched in shock. After a brief moment of silence, Sir Alaric finally gave a nod of approval. Penelope was still a nervous wreck, though. While the mage cheered her on, the boy could only watch the two of them leave in silence. They found the purse quickly, and Penelope thanked the hero, who immediately wanted to head back to the others. Wait, not yet. She stopped him, and when he asked if she needed help with something else, she struggled to find the words. The hero looked at her, asking what was on her mind, while she internally panicked. She was losing the perfect opening her friend had made. Gathering every ounce of courage, Penelope asked if there was anyone he currently liked. Alaric's expression darkened as he admitted there was someone once, and he looked genuinely heartbroken. Penelope's heart sank, assuming he meant a tragic ex-lover, but then he dropped the bombshell: she had passed away. The girls spiraled into a panic, apologizing for the insensitive question, but the old knight just sighed and said it was fine. Penelope's mind raced, assuming this loss was some sort of grand tragedy. She figured it was a fallen comrade from a dangerous raid, but in reality, Alaric was talking about an old lady who died of old age. Then he redirected her weird question toward his second disciple, leaving the girl totally confused. To her utter shock, the master implied his pupil was the one with feelings for her, saying they were a great match. Blushing furiously, she blurted out that her heart belonged to someone else. Now, it was the hero's turn to be curious. He asked if this crush was an acquaintance of his. Overwhelmed and unable to answer, Penelope turned and bolted for the restroom. Alaric just stood there, completely baffled. Youth these days, he thought, I'll never understand them. Meanwhile, back at the tavern, a heavy, uncomfortable silence had settled over the room as only 2 hunters remained. The girl tried to make some small talk, commenting on how long everyone was taking to get back. Sir Cedric started worrying about his junior being in the bathroom for so long, but the mage just waved it off like it was nothing. Jane wondered if her friend had found any luck yet. Meanwhile, that very friend was staring in shock at a completely frozen Sir Arthur. She assumed this was it, the big romantic confession. Her heart was absolutely pounding against her chest. But that excitement turned to pure ice. Arthur suddenly apologized as a terrifying, dark presence loomed right behind her. Jane turned around and froze in sheer horror. She let out a piercing scream, while Arthur just watched in haunting silence. Back at the camp, Alaric was getting restless. Jane had left for the powder room 30 minutes ago, way too long for a simple break. Suddenly, his communication stone began to glow. He picked it up and... The voice on the other end sent a chill down his spine, asking about Lady Jane. Alaric snapped, demanding to know who the hell was on the other line. The caller just laughed. He introduced himself as the man guarding Jane, mocking the old knight who clearly hated his underhanded tactics. The message was simple: Jane stays safe as long as Alaric follows orders. With no other choice, our hero agreed. The kidnapper sent over a meeting point with one final warning: come alone. Alaric's eyes were burning with pure rage as he hung up. Later that night, in a desolate clearing, a pack of thugs stood around their boss, who was tired of waiting. One goon was foolish enough to ask if their target would even bother showing up. The air turned heavy. Seeing the look on the boss's face, the man immediately realized he made a massive mistake. Before he could blink, his face was crushed in a savage grip. He was hoisted into the air and tossed aside like a piece of trash. It's Guildmaster, the man growled. They weren't some petty street gang anymore. The Guildmaster used the moment to threaten the others. They were a legal guild now in the eyes of the High Council, and he expected the respect that came with it. He ordered his men to drag the fool away before finally taking his seat. Just then, another soldier asked about the words of the Northern Star leader. Silas closed his eyes and began to remember. Earlier at the Northern Star Guild, Duke Julian watched as his men tried to block an intruder. Silas just barged right into the Duke's private chambers. It had been a long time since Silas last saw Julian, and the Duke wasn't exactly thrilled about this uninvited guest. Silas dropped a bombshell. He'd heard a rumor that the legendary Duke of the Northern Star had been defeated by a mere bronze-rank knight. Julian was stunned. The Duke shot back, saying Silas must be incredibly bored to travel all this way just to insult him. So, Silas revealed his true motive. He wanted the dirt on this bronze-rank prodigy. Julian gave him a warning: don't mess with the guy, call it a favor between old friends. Being called a friend by a high-ranking noble made Silas burst out laughing. He flashed a wide, wicked smile. He was determined to prove the Duke wrong, no matter how much Julian feared the outcome. Back in the present, the sound of footsteps snapped Silas back to reality. Our hero, Alaric, finally made his entrance, looking completely cold and emotionless. Silas welcomed him immediately, complaining about the long wait. Alaric didn't care for small talk. He demanded to know where the girl was. Seeing how desperate he was, Silas just smirked. He promised that Jane was perfectly safe. But seeing her motionless made Alaric's blood boil. He wanted an explanation, and he wanted it now. Silas shrugged, saying she was just drugged and sleeping. Alaric's voice was like ice. He demanded to know the name of this guild and what they were after. Silas realized he'd forgotten his manners. He introduced himself as Lord Silas, leader of the Blackwood Guild. That's when Alaric remembered Jane mentioning this group before. They were trouble. Silas laughed when Alaric called him insane. "You must be pretty confident to face us all by yourself," Silas mocked. But then the gangster mentioned it was expected of a legendary knight. Alaric froze. They knew. They actually knew his real identity. Silas wasn't an idiot. He wouldn't go through all this trouble just to bait some nameless low-ranker. Now that the secret was out, Silas was amazed. A legendary warrior looking like a young teenager. It was unbelievable. Alaric was even more shocked when Silas revealed the High Council of Lords was also aware of his return. Silas began to speculate. Just how powerful was this man in his prime? He recalled the legends. Alaric was once destined to lead the entire High Council. That's why they hated him. He was a threat to their throne. Then came the truth. The High Council had actually hired Silas to eliminate the low-rank knight. But it felt off. Silas did his own research and uncovered the truth about Alaric's past. Alaric narrowed his eyes. So this kidnapping was just a plot to get him out of the picture. But then Silas did the unthinkable. He reached out his hand and offered a partnership. Our hero was absolutely stunned. Lord Alastair Thorne made it clear. The Royal Council was a massive thorn in his side, always poking their noses where they didn't belong. Since they both had a serious bone to pick with the Council, he suggested they team up and burn the whole system down together. Sir Arthur wasn't having it, pointing out that while he hated many things, seeing a loved one in danger because of Alastair's games was a bridge way too far. The guild master offered a half-hearted apology for using Arthur's daughter as bait, claiming it was just his twisted way of declaring war on the council. But Arthur knew the score. The girl was a hostage because Alastair knew he'd never agree to this madness without a knife to his throat. Alastair actually had the nerve to grin, praising the old knight for being sharp enough to see through the entire play. Arthur called him out for being the shameless snake his former student warned him about, but Alastair just shrugged. He really wanted Arthur as a partner. "But wait," the guild master teased with a wicked smirk. "I've got a little surprise for you, old man." As a figure stepped forward, Arthur felt his heart drop. It was Julian, his very own former student, standing right there in the enemy's shadow. The arrogant guild master revealed that Julian had been his mole all along, mockingly asking Arthur what he thought of that little betrayal. Then came the ultimatum: cooperate or Lady Alara pays the price. Arthur's response: a cold, terrifying promise that he'd never forget this insult. Absolutely fuming now, the legendary knight decided it was time to give this young upstart a physical education he'd never forget. Arthur told the thug to brace himself as our veteran hero prepared to take on the entire room at once. Alastair just laughed, amused that a relic was trying to discipline him, reminding Arthur that his days of being the kingdom's finest were long gone. In his eyes, the legend had withered away into a mere veteran-rank weakling who just couldn't keep up with the new age of power. "Prepare to pay for your stubbornness," Alastair sneered, before waving his hand for his goons to tear the old man apart. But Arthur hadn't lost a step. He effortlessly wove through the first strike like it was absolutely nothing. Sensing a coward trying to slip behind him, he sidestepped the blade, vanished into the shadow, and delivered a brutal kick right to the guy's jaw. One down, just like that. Arthur leveled a cold stare at the rest of the guild, asking if that was really all they had to offer. Then, the moment we've been waiting for, the legendary sword slid from its sheath. It was time for the real counterattack to begin. Our hero charged like a thunderbolt, going straight for Alistair's throat, but the guild master didn't even flinch. To Arthur's genuine surprise, the thug actually managed to catch the blade with his own, stopping the momentum cold. Alistair admitted the old man still had some bite, conceding that his legendary reputation wasn't just a fairy tale for children. He shoved Arthur back, declaring that the past belongs in the grave. It was time for the 80-year-old knight to just accept his fate and die. Arthur didn't say a word, just gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening like cold, tempered steel. The fight exploded back to life, both men moving so fast they became nothing but blurs to the surrounding thugs who couldn't even track the movement. Alistair realized he'd messed up by underestimating the veteran, visibly shocked by the power radiating from the old knight. He couldn't believe this man was moving with such miraculous youth, while Arthur just grew angrier seeing such talent used for such shameless, criminal ends. "Enough games," Alistair roared, finally getting serious as he unleashed his ultimate skill, the Fist of Iron Will. His men started cheering, convinced that the legendary knight was about to be turned into a grease stain on the floor by that overwhelming power. But Arthur wasn't impressed at all. He blocked the unstoppable blow with total ease, leaving the entire guild in a state of shock. Before Alistair could even process what happened, he looked up and saw Arthur descending on him like an avenging angel from above. Boom! Arthur landed a heavy blow, sending the guild master screaming in pain, while the old knight barely looked like he'd broken a sweat. Alistair hit the dirt, coughing up blood, his ego bruised even worse than his ribs. Arthur stood over him, mocking his pathetic mastery of his own high paladin powers, and telling him that fancy skills are useless without the basics. The words hit Alistair like a physical blow. It was the exact same lecture the old man had given him years ago during his training. Enraged by the lesson, the guild master screamed for his healers to fix him up immediately, and they scrambled to obey his command. Once the bleeding stopped, Alistair had to face facts. The old legend was still a terrifying force of nature to be feared. Fully mended and desperate to save face, the guild master proposed they continue their little dance. Gathering every ounce of his mana, Alistair launched a desperate, full-power charge, certain that the old man couldn't possibly parry him this time. But then Arthur simply coated his blade in a thin, shimmering layer of pure mana. And Alistair was left utterly baffled as his ultimate charge was slapped aside like a fly, sending him tumbling backward. Panting and broken, the thug demanded to know what secret, high-level skill could possibly overpower his best attack like that. Arthur just looked at him with pity, stating he'd simply put a little extra magic into his sword. Nothing more, nothing less. Alistair couldn't wrap his head around it, but Arthur left him with one final truth. The power of a skill depends solely on the man wielding it. With a roar of frustration, the rogue noble lunged at him once again. But our hero just smirked, pointing out how his opponent's blade was literally falling apart. That was the moment the High Paladin realized the legendary knight had been systematically shredding his weapon from the start. Disarmed and desperate, the brute backed into a corner like a trapped animal. Panicking, he turned his fury toward young Liam. The coward ordered the terrified squire to end Sir Julian's life if the old master even breathed the wrong way. The boy froze, trapped between his conscience and the threat of the blade. He felt like he had no choice but to obey. Sneering, the villain asked the master what his next move would be, now that his friend's life was dangling by a thread. Just like that, it was a total standoff. Both the master and his student had to weigh their next move with life-or-death precision. Seeing he was in a tight spot, the Baron demanded the hero drop his sword immediately if he wanted Sir Julian to see tomorrow. Sir Alistair gave his ashamed apprentice a long, unreadable look before letting his blade clatter to the stones. "Does this satisfy you?" he asked the High Paladin. The man laughed, basking in the moment. That was exactly the kind of submission he expected from a fallen legend. He claimed he didn't want to kill him just yet, but he promised the old man wouldn't leave without every bone in his body shattered as he charged in. Big mistake. Sir Alistair moved like lightning, smashing his knee into the thug's face and sending a scream of pure agony through the air. He didn't stop there. The hero repositioned and delivered a devastating kick to the man's gut, sending him crashing clean through the stone wall. Just like that power. Baron Vane was a wreck, coughing up blood, but he wheezed out that his threats against the lady weren't just for show. When 𝒉𝒂𝒅 spat at how pathetic it was for a high-ranking noble to kidnap an innocent, the villain just smirked. He never claimed to be a saint. To prove he wasn't bluffing, he barked a final, cruel order to Liam. "Cut off the knight's arms, now." The young man hesitated, his whole body shaking. In the end, he just couldn't bring himself to do it. This sent the boss into a blind rage. He screamed the order again, leaving the poor boy absolutely paralyzed with fear. Liam was right on the edge of breaking when suddenly, his master's voice cut through the chaos. He chose that moment to remind the boy why he wanted to be a knight in the first place, asking if a life of forced crime was truly the legacy he wanted. Young Liam wavered. He started remembering the heroes from the old tales he used to worship, the kind of man he actually wanted to be. Seeing the hesitation, the Baron lost it. He screamed for the boy to finish the job, filling his head with terror once again. But Liam found his courage. He let the knife hit the floor with a heavy thud. That betrayal made the High Paladin's blood boil. Vane lunged at the boy to kill him himself, but he realized too late. The legendary knight was already standing right behind him. 𝒉𝒂𝒅 delivered a brutal flying kick that slammed the thug's head into the dirt, leaving him howling in pain. Right there, in front of all his men, the great commander was finished. He had no choice but to admit 𝒉𝒂𝒅's victory, begging for his life in exchange for whatever the master wanted. The coward actually tried to claim he never intended to kill the hero in the first place. 𝒉𝒂𝒅 wasn't buying it. He knew men like this don't stop their evil deeds just because you ask nicely. They only respond to raw, physical pain. The rest of the mercenaries watched in absolute horror as their boss whimpered that he'd already surrendered and that more violence wasn't necessary. The master just watched him, his gaze colder than ice. The Baron kept begging, swearing on his soul that he would never cross the old man's path ever again. Total desperation. Terror gripped his heart as the hero raised his blade for the final strike. But the steel missed his neck by a hair, thudding deep into the ground. The Baron literally passed out from pure, unadulterated fear. Sir 𝒉𝒂𝒅 turned to the remaining henchmen and asked if anyone else had a problem with him. Not a single soul dared to speak. To him, they were just mindless drones. He told them to get their pathetic boss out of his sight unless they were looking for a grave. Liam stood there in the heavy silence as he watched the old master slowly approach him. The boy was drowning in shame. He couldn't even bring himself to call 𝒉𝒂𝒅 master as he apologized for the deception. The old man didn't say a word. He just raised his fist high. Liam braced for the worst, but instead, 𝒉𝒂𝒅 just gave him a small smile and a firm pat on the shoulder. "From now on," he said, "you call me master." The young man was stunned. He couldn't believe he was being forgiven after everything he'd done. 𝒉𝒂𝒅 explained that everyone makes mistakes, and scolding is only for those who refuse to see them. Then he mentioned Liam's old dream of being a hero again. The master told him about a story he'd been reading where the main character only finds true strength after surviving the hardest trials. He looked the boy in the eye and told him he resembled that hero more than he realized. Those words hit Liam right in the heart. With that, the master said it was time to grab Sir Julian and leave this place behind. As they walked away, young Liam was left to reflect on a day that had changed his entire world. A bit later, a frustrated Sir 𝒉𝒂𝒅 of the North Star demanded to know the real reason behind this unexpected secret meeting. Arthur didn't even flinch. He simply said he wanted a chat, then dared the man to say he had a single problem with it. 𝒉𝒂𝒅 backed down, admitting he was just confused why Arthur chose the Iron Bear Knights' territory as their hideout. But the moment they stepped inside, pure shock. He watched, speechless, as the elite Iron Bear guards bowed to Arthur with total respect. The former rogue could only follow behind in dead silence. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Why on earth were these high-ranking knights treating Arthur like their rightful king? It didn't sit right. He was starting to get very, very suspicious. Finally, he asked if Arthur had officially joined the Iron Bear Order, but Arthur just scoffed. He'd never joined such a lot, he said, before telling the North Star leader to shut up and follow. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 had a sinking feeling. He knew exactly what was waiting behind the next door. Arthur casually kicked open the office door, revealing a man cowering in pure terror behind the desk. This was none other than Lord Baron, a Saint-Tier knight and the master of the castle. Arthur was disgusted, telling the massive man to stand up straight. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 stood there, completely baffled as this legendary warrior apologized like a frightened child. The master of the 11th couldn't believe his eyes. Even if Baron was the weakest of the Saint-Tiers, he was still a powerhouse of a hunter. Yet here was our hero, casually chewing him out for hiding like a coward, despite his massive, intimidating frame. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 had seen enough. He demanded an explanation right then and there. Arthur kept it simple. He'd physically put that gangster in his place and had no clue why the guy was still acting like a total mess or how he was even running a guild. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 couldn't argue with that. Then, Arthur remembered 𝒂𝒆𝒅's old dream of rising to the top, and that's when he dropped the ultimate offer. The leader of the North Star nearly choked. Arthur was asking him to just absorb the entire Iron Bear Order. According to Arthur, this was the way forward. The North Star would become an absolute powerhouse. Still, 𝒂𝒆𝒅 didn't think it was right for his guild to swallow one that technically outranked them. Arthur found that hilarious, considering 𝒂𝒆𝒅 used to force people to join him by any means. He turned to Baron and asked if he had any objections to being taken over. The terrified Saint-Tier knight didn't hesitate. He was perfectly fine with the merger and would even quit the knightly world forever if he had to. But Arthur shut that down immediately. Baron had to stay exactly where he was. The guild needed Saint-Tier muscle, so the man quickly agreed to serve. To 𝒂𝒆𝒅, the guy looked absolutely pathetic. With the master's agreement secured, Arthur turned back to 𝒂𝒆𝒅 for his final decision. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 was curious. Why pick him after all their past blood? Arthur revealed the truth. He was building an elite team to take down the Royal Council itself. Arthur laid it out. He'd have the 11th-ranked North Star absorb the 10th-ranked Iron Bears as a start, turning them into the first. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 was floored. Arthur just looked at him, reminding him of his dream to build the greatest guild in the world. 𝒂𝒆𝒅 hesitated, assuming Arthur was just asking him to become another servant. But Arthur shook his head. He just wanted to help him get there. The offer was too tempting to refuse, and 𝒂𝒆𝒅 finally made his choice. The leader of the North Star officially agreed to the takeover. Arthur couldn't help but smile. Things were moving. Just then, a guard burst into the room with an urgent report. The emissary of the Royal Council was back and demanding to see Lord Baron immediately. Now this was interesting. Arthur's eyes lit up just as the heavy doors were thrown open. Sir Julian stepped into the room, offering a cold apology for his sudden and unannounced visit. Baron pulled himself together, demanding to know why the council was dropping by so unexpectedly. Just moments before, Arthur had explained that they would hide in the next room while Baron met with the council's envoy. The man had been shaking, terrified after an 80-year-old man warned him against acting suspicious. Back in the present, Baron stood tall and asked Julian why he was there. Julian didn't mince words. He was there for an update on the secret mission given to the Iron Bear Knights. Apparently, his superiors were getting very impatient about the whole matter. But then, Julian stopped, looking intrigued as he noticed the guild master let out a quiet sigh of relief. Lord Baron took a risk, asking the head of the Inquisition force why the council was so obsessed with a simple veteran-tier knight. Julian just cracked a chilling smile. He made it clear he had no reason to justify their orders to a man like him. Sir Julian told him to just blindly obey if he wanted to keep his guild's ranking. Baron knew he was being threatened, even if the man claimed it was just business. The message was delivered, loud and clear. The head of the Inquisition turned to leave, tossing out one last warning to get results. Baron was left fuming, absolutely annoyed by the disrespect. But that annoyance turned to pure fear the second Arthur popped back into the room to see if the coast was clear. The old man actually looked impressed. He praised the Saint-Tier knight, admitting the guy had some surprisingly good acting skills. Lord Alastair stood tall, releasing a crushing pressure as he asked Sir Alaric point-blank, was he planning to betray them after everything? The Grandmaster Knight didn't find the joke funny at all, taking it as a lethal threat. He swore he had zero intention of stabbing them in the back. Alastair just scoffed, pointing out how the Sovereign Union had completely lost its honor. All they cared about was the win, no matter how dirty the tactics, even pitting noble houses against each other for a bit of profit. It was clear now, the organization that once protected the realm's warriors was rotten to the core, ready to sacrifice innocence. This left the old lord deep in thought. Who exactly was this young hero? The Union wanted him dead so badly they were willing to burn everything down to do it. That was the final straw. Alastair made his choice. It was time to stop hiding and finally launch a counterattack. Later that day, in a quiet corner of a local tavern, our protagonist sat face to face with his former student, Julian. Alastair noted how Julian had walked away from the life of a knight. The boy nodded. After some soul-searching, he realized he just wasn't built for the battlefield. But when asked what he planned to do next, Julian went silent. He didn't have an answer. Fast forward to that evening, Julian stood inside the great cathedral's broadcast tower, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a nervous wreck, but the producer kept him steady, promising his face would stay hidden behind a mask. He just had to relax and tell the truth once the magic mirrors started recording. And just like that, it was showtime. The recording officially began. Julian stepped into the spotlight. The town herald started the broadcast, telling viewers that some shocking secrets were about to come to light. Word on the street was that some of the most powerful knightly orders were involved in some seriously dark business, and they had a special whistleblower to prove it. Wearing a heavy mask to hide his face, Julian greeted the massive audience watching across the kingdom. The herald asked the big question, was he really part of a top-tier noble house? Julian didn't blink. Yes, he confirmed. Then came the bombshells. Julian confessed that their leader was a monster who terrorized civilians and forced commoners into brutal slave contracts. But right as he was about to drop the biggest secret of all, a loud, violent crash echoed through the tower. The crew panicked, and someone went to see what the hell was happening. The sound was coming from right, behind the heavy studio doors. Before anyone could move, the doors exploded inward. Sir Alaric, the Grandmaster himself, barged in, absolutely livid that this secret confession was happening on his watch. He roared at the crew, demanding to know what kind of game they were playing. The producer tried to play it cool, reminding the knight they were on live air, but Alaric wasn't listening. He grabbed the man by the collar and lifted him off the ground. Alaric didn't give a damn about the cameras. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he snarled, threatening to slaughter everyone if they didn't hand over the boy immediately. The poor civilian was terrified and confused. The armored thug made it simple. He was here for his runaway apprentice. The producer tried to act like he didn't know anything, but his eyes darted toward a side door for a split second. Big mistake. Alaric knew exactly where the boy was hiding. He kicked the door down, ready to drag Julian out, but to his absolute shock, the room was empty. Now Alaric was beyond pissed. He screamed Julian's name, his voice shaking the very walls of the tower in a blind rage. But then a voice cut through the chaos. "I didn't expect to see a Grandmaster acting like a common street thug today." Enter Captain Mordecai of the Crown Guard. Suddenly, Alaric found himself surrounded by armed men. Alaric looked ready for a fight, but Mordecai stood his ground, explaining that the Major Crimes Unit was here because of an anonymous tip about a troubling knight. Still, even the captain was surprised to see it was a man of Alaric's status causing the mess. Alaric tried to spin it, claiming he was just taking out a traitor who was trying to smear his name on the magic mirrors. Mordecai wasn't buying it. His behavior was a public disgrace, and the crown guard couldn't just look the other way anymore. But here's the twist. The Grandmaster laughed, claiming that Julian actually knew about the secret, dirty deal between the knights and the guard. Mordecai called him out for his barbaric methods, looking completely disgusted by the man he once respected. Alaric didn't care. He shouted that the only reason he did the dirty work was because the Sovereign Union ordered him to. Now Mordecai was stuck. If the boy knew too much, he was a liability to everyone. The priorities shifted. They had to find Julian and fast. And what happens when they find him? The order was chilling: terminate him. Leave no witnesses, leave no proof. While they were arguing, they realized Alaric had vanished. He wasn't waiting around. Mordecai ordered his men to hunt down the knight, assuming he was making a break for it. But Alaric had other plans. He was going to be the one to personally end Julian's life. The captain urged his men to track the boy down before it was too late. Meanwhile, Julian was already miles away, huddled in the darkness of an alleyway. Now that he was off the radar, the former knight started to wonder, where in the world was Lord Alistair? Julian thought back to their meeting at the tavern, remembering the look in his master's eyes when he asked about the future. He had told the old man that starting a new life was nearly impossible. After spending his whole life as a weapon, he didn't know how to be anything else. Leo felt a wave of guilt, like he was just dumping his own mess onto the old man's shoulders. He turned to Sir William, asking why they were even meeting here. The veteran knight smiled. He needed a favor. Now Leo was curious. But back to the present. Leo was sweating. He followed the old man's plan to the letter, but now he was totally lost and praying his master would show up soon. Suddenly, an order guard lunged, blade gleaming. But just as death approached, the ringing sound of clashing steel filled the air. He made it. The master arrived just in time to shield his student. Leo's face lit up. Talk about a relief. You did well, William praised him. I'm here now, boy. You have nothing left to fear. Meanwhile, Lord Sterling, a high knight of the realm, was roaring for his prey. When asked if the kid really went this way, Sterling just nodded. Commander Alaric was fuming. Move it. I don't have time for these games. Sterling just shrugged. Hey, to is human, right? Then whoosh. A massive table flew across the room, missing Alaric's head by an inch. The culprit, none other than Sterling himself. He wasn't letting anyone out of that building. See, a while back, the big shot knight was actually terrified. Why? Because he'd been ordered to stall the royal order. His absolute terror of Sir William left him no choice but to obey. Now, he was kicking himself for ignoring his advisor's warnings. Alaric spat on the ground. You realize this makes you an enemy of the entire royal order, right? Sterling didn't blink. Listen, there's one man I fear way more than your little club of knights. That was it. Alaric decided to move up the schedule. He was going to execute him right then and there. Sterling was beyond annoyed. Seriously, lately it felt like nobody gave him the respect he deserved. They traded insults, pure hatred at first sight, before Sterling found himself completely surrounded by Alaric's elite forces. Then total chaos. Sterling laughed at their numbers and slammed his fist down, creating a massive shockwave of pure force. But Alaric was one step ahead. Too cocky, he sneered. Suddenly, glowing magic chains snaked out and tangled around the knight. Sterling froze. He was actually trapped. The shock on his face said it all. Alaric finally revealed his secret. You don't become commander of the Inquisitors for nothing. He possessed a unique binding skill, a god-killer ability specifically designed to restrain the strongest warriors in the land. He claimed most high knights fall for these slow-moving chains because their pride won't let them dodge. Alaric gave the signal. The chains tightened. Sterling let out a gut-wrenching scream of pure agony. The mighty lord of the Grizzlies fell to his knees. See, Alaric mocked. Even the weak can slay the strong if they play it smart. He snatched a sword from his subordinate, ready to deliver the final blow to Sterling's neck. But just as he swung, he felt a massive presence charging at him from the shadows. It was Sir William. Alaric barely blocked the impact and scrambled back to create some distance. Why is a legend like you here? Alaric demanded. William just stood his ground. Why would I ever be anywhere else? Everything clicked for Alaric. It wasn't a coincidence. William was the puppet master who'd pushed Sterling to betray them. William's eyes narrowed. Tell me, who ordered the boy's execution? Alaric stayed silent. His men panicked, but he saw a chance. Sterling was still tied up. Charge, kill him now. One guard swung a heavy iron flail, aiming straight for our hero's head. Alaric was desperate, and his men threw everything they had at William. But the legend, he didn't even flinch as he tore through them like paper. Not a single scratch. They couldn't even get close to touching the legendary knight. And that's where we're stopping for today. If you want to see the next epic clash, hit that bell and I'll see you in the next one. Right here on 𝒕𝒐𝒏𝒔.